Welcome to Michigan Montessori Society's 2021 Virtual Fall Workshop. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Karen Lumsden, current president of MMS. I believe we've found a presenter that will provide you with a great deal of information as you work with or raise young children. This event will be interactive. However, please remain on mute unless you're speaking to the group. This presentation will be recorded for future use, and the presenter asks that you keep your cameras on and please set your screen name to the name you used when you registered for this event. If you're uncomfortable being seen or recorded, you may, of course, turn your camera off. If MMS is committed to providing meaningful workshops to the Montessori community, both virtual and hopefully soon in person. To that end, we will be sending you a brief survey when the workshop is over. We would appreciate your completing the survey so that we can continue to provide events that will meet the needs of our community. I'd like to thank the many board members that have worked to put this event together. I know it is a labor of love on their parts, but still it's a significant amount of labor. And a special thank you to the MMS Workshop Committee. At this point, I'd like to introduce you to our current Vice President, Cindy Iannuzzi, who will introduce today's speaker. Cindy?
Thanks, Karen. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us at our Michigan Montessori Fall Workshop. We are so excited for you to see this presentation. As Karen has said, it's very interactive. And as you can see, Julia is a very dynamic speaker. Let me tell you a little bit about Julia. I met Julia several years ago at a AMI refresher course, and I was buying my first set of 3-part cards from her company that she calls Maitri Learning. Julia is the founder and the president of Maitri Learning, and her materials are used in Montessori classrooms all over the world. She is a mother of 2 young adults. One, who today is her birthday, she's 27 years old, so happy birthday to your daughter. And she also has a puppy that she loves to spend time with. She credits her children for being the reason why she is so passionate about Montessori. She has written many blogs and publications that highlight Montessori pedagogy. But perhaps one of her greatest achievements to date is her involvement in teaching the neuroscience of learning since 2012. She teaches this course at the Harvard University Extension School. Her research and study on brain development is something that she is very committed to share with educators and parents. Please help me welcome Julia Volkman.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm so happy to be here. Hello, everybody. Good morning. How good to see you all. Look at those happy faces. This is very exciting. I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited to have such a great turnout. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen, but Erin, you've disabled screen sharing. So can you allow me to screen share? It's just going to take a minute, but I'm just looking through. We're going to start. I'll just give you 1 second about who I am. I have a little family. I run Maitri Learning and I help teach this course at Harvard. And at the end of everything, this is enticement for you while Erin gets screen sharing. There you go. So first, she told you who I am. There's a picture of my family and there's my puppy. Right? This is Apple. She's 7 months old. Oh my gosh, is she cute? This is my very handsome husband, and we love to kayak. That's what we do. And then Maitri Learning and Harvard are my places where I work. But I want to know who you are. So Erin, if you can run the poll, we have a little poll to ask about who's here and what you teach, or if you're a parent or both. Many of us are both. And if you can just launch that poll, Erin, everybody take a second to answer. So while we're waiting for Erin to figure that out, I want to ask, has anybody seen my Neuroscience of Montessori video? Has anybody seen that? I see many hands are raised. That's okay. Good. That's good. Okay. Oh, thumbs up. I like the thumbs up. Very good with the emoticons, Teresa. Excellent. Feel happy to use that. Okay. So now you should see this poll launched up in front of you. You can choose more than one, and then you can submit your results.
Ooh. Primary. Doesn't surprise me right now. They're in the lead. We have a lot of infant and toddler and administrators though.
And you'll share the results in a minute, yes, as soon as everybody can have a chance to answer.
Yep, right now, primary is definitely in the lead.
Yep. And Linda's got her hand raised already. Linda, go ahead with your question while we're waiting.
Oh, I was just raising my hand because I watched the video.
Oh, yay. Okay. Well, now you get to practice lowering your hand. Now everybody knows if you raise your hand, I will call on you. Get ready. Okay, can you launch the results, Erin?
Yep.
Of what
Here
we
go.
have?
All right.
Let's see who's here. All right, so we've got, infant, toddler, primary, elementary, adolescent. Yay! I've got my 16-year-old son too. Okay, and then parents and teachers. Okay, great. So we've got a nice broad range. Well, we're going to talk about the whole spectrum of development. It's not just going to be one age group. So you're all in the right place. Okay, good. All right. So today's plan, we're going to review some core ideas. And there was a handout that I think went out to people. And if not, I bet at the end, Cindy or Karen can tell you how to get that handout if you need it, or Kathy. And that just kind of reviews some of the key ideas we're going to go over. Everybody, please have paper and a writing utensil. There is a handwritten portion to this workshop. And, Colleen, how did you do that? Colleen just drew on our screen. That's fun. I haven't seen anyone do that before. Colleen's like the special sleuth person for
You have to
for that.
turn off annotating
Turn off annotating.
under.
Clear.
No, I was using my phone to print the handout, and that's how it came.
Oh,
But I'm on Zoom on my iPad, so that's weird.
it is weird. Well, anyway, now we know. If you want to draw smiley faces on the slides, you can.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. Now we know. Okay. And the reason I ask cameras to be on is because social contagion is actually a neurological thing. And when we see other people and their reactions and how they're engaged or not engaged, that affects us, and it influences our mirror neuron system. So it's really helpful to have your camera on if you don't mind. Okay. Let me come back to this. That's the logistics. Oh, and do not disturb or mute or silence your phones, which I did because I almost forgot. So we're not interrupted. Okay, first, with that pen and paper that you have, we're going to take exactly 1 minute, and I'm timing so that you can write down two things. Why did you come today on one side of your paper? What questions do you hope we will answer? Okay, and I'm setting my timer right now. And go. Okay, so the reason I do that is actually two reasons. First of all, it helps you organize your thinking, but there is no learning without prior experience. And your past knowledge and prior experience is super relevant to any learning that's going to happen now. So we're trying to just bring that up a little bit in front so that you can think about what's going to happen. And then at the end or throughout this, you can make sure that your questions are answered. You have them organized and written down. One other thing about the chat, please feel free to use the chat. You can use it in any way that seems appropriate to you. I will not be able to really look at the chat that often because I can't multitask, and I'll tell you why later in this morning's workshop. But so Erin and Cindy and Karen and Kathy, they're going to help me with the chat. And if you have questions or anything, please put them in there, and they will bring them forward to me if or you can raise your hand. But please do feel free to comment and talk as we go along. Okay. All right. So education, first of all, let's just start by saying this. Education physically changes the brain. Now, usually we would take these tests, right, to prove that there was some result of something. And so here's an example from an LSAT prep course. There are your pre-scores and your post-scores. So before you took the prep course, you got this on the LSAT. After you took the prep course, you got this on the LSAT. So it worked, right? Well, you could actually measure that physically in the brain. When you have that kind of a change, you can see that there are increased neural connections as a result of learning. So you're physically changing. So right now, your brain is different from how it was 13 minutes ago, okay? Yes, be afraid. There's no fear, right? It's just like, okay, everything we do really matters because the brain never stops changing. When we're little, it's like 300 grams, right? And it gets to be 1,000 grams more as we're adults. But so you can see there has to be change. It's not just done when we're born. It has to grow. It has to get bigger. And we're born with about all of the neurons that we'll ever have, which is about 86 billion. but I just want to say there's plus or minus 8 million neurons. So I may be like, like a 76 million neuron person, right? You may be like a 94 million person. There's difference, okay? There's difference, and that's human variability. And it's biology and experience that shapes our brain. And it's our genes, right? When we talk about biology, we're talking about genetics, but also our just physiology as it's functioning and running. And our genes are turning on and off all the time, which is wild, right? So like if you like got your, 23andMe and you're like, oh no, I have the breast cancer gene, you don't have to necessarily panic because genes are not always on. They have to be turned on by environmental stimuli. Okay, so here's an example of that. And I love these identical twins, Otto and Ewald, right? And they're identical twins. They have exactly the same gene, right? Their genetics are the same, but look at them, right? This Ewald's all pumped up and Otto's like, oh, I like to read, and that's great, right? They're different. So this is just showing you that genes are it's not set in stone when we're first born, right? It's our actions and environment influence things because our brains are like faces. No two are exactly alike. And I personally think that's a very good thing, this variability, right? That's the 8 billion plus or minus neurons. That variability is good. But let me show you how this kind of comes about. And if you saw my video, this will be a little bit of a refresher for you, which is really good because repetition, as we know, is a human tendency, right? Thank you, Maria Montessori. Okay, so repetition is good. So this is help for you. So I'm just going to show you this little thing. So here we have, some of you have taken biology, whatever, you'll remember this. These are neurons. This is a slice of brain, and these are neurons. And this little black circle is called the cell body or the soma. And these long skinny lines, you can see, oh, I lost my mouth. This long skinny line back here is an axon. And these little skinny lines here are dendrites, okay? So the axon and the dendrites. The axons are the part that get myelinated. They get that coating on them. And just as an aside, myelin is not fat, just so you know. Myelin is actually a living cell. It's called an oligodendrocyte. So this is if you can remember one thing to impress people today, say, oh, myelin is not fat, it's an oligodendrocyte, which is a great word to remember. And it is actually a living cell that lives and wraps itself around axons based on their activity. So if they get really active, then the myelin, the oligodendrocytes come right over, they sniff it out and they're like, oh, wrap around you. And they wrap around it. And so they create that myelin sheath, which is part of a living cell. Okay, anyway, so we've got these little neurons in the brain here. And you can see from newborn to 1 month to 6 months to 2 years, there's not a huge change. There's not really a change in the number of little black circles. Do you see that? The cell bodies? There's about the same number of neurons, but what is changing? This is really sparse connections and then more and more and more. And now it's like a tangled web of connections. So it's those axons and dendrites, particularly the dendrites that are growing like crazy, the axons lengthening and myelinating. And that's the change that happens. We're not growing new neurons in most of the brain, but we are growing connections, all right? And those connections proliferate in early childhood. We're programmed to go crazy. But these overcrowded connections are really inefficient. And that's why, if you ever ask, a toddler to do anything, right? It's like, takes forever, right? You're like, could you put on your shoes? And they're like, oh, nothing's happening. And you're waiting and waiting and waiting. That's because they've got to get from point A to point B. And how are they going to get there, right? There's no clear path. It's this tangled web that they've got to get through. So just think about that when you're waiting and waiting and waiting. Think about how hard it is for them to get where they're going. They don't have a superhighway yet. Okay, it's hard. And that's why it takes forever. It's like, do you like Family Circus? I love Family Circus. And this is like, here we go. Here's little Jeffy. And he's starting here and he has to get here. But look at how he goes. He goes everywhere before he gets there, right? That's just what's happening with those overcrowded connections. Okay. So what happens over time is these underused connections get pruned away. And that's how we make these great superhighways, this easy connectivity path so that we can be faster with what we're doing and more efficient. So you can see at birth, we've got the sparse connections. Age 7, really crowded. And then age 15, not as crowded. So you're like, oh, that's what happens in adolescence, right? They're losing their connections, right? Yeah, but that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. It's good. It's not bad. So that makes things more efficient. So pruning improves the efficiency of neural networks. And it basically turns your desert, you're stepping on cactuses, then you're walking through the trail into a superhighway, right? Much more efficient, easier to get through. Okay. And whenever we do these things repeatedly, we are creating the physical architecture of our brain. And this is really cool. This is a 3D printout of the myelinated axons in the brain. So I just told you about myelin. So you could actually pick it up and see where all the axons are going, right? Really, really interesting stuff. I love the brain. So you can see the idea is basically use it or lose it, right? We're going to grow connections and we're going to prune connections. We're growing them to a great degree based on our experiences and interactions and effort in the environment. And this is why Dr. Montessori said every unnecessary aid is an obstacle to development. In neuroscience, we say practice makes permanent, okay? And this is why we can't step in too much, but not too little, right? Because we need the child to be growing their connections and refining their connections. The adult already has strong connections for doing these tasks, right? It's the child who needs to develop them. Okay, so we're going to start now with a quick quiz. Are you ready for a quiz? We're born, and you can either say the answer aloud, you can, actually that would be a little crazy with the feedback, but you can type it in the chat, you can just think it to yourself. We're born with most of the neurons we'll have. Think true or false, and Shona's shaking her head, she's saying true, and the answer is true. We're born with most of the neurons we'll ever have, about 86 billion plus or minus 8 billion. Little variability there. Okay, next. Here we go. Oops. Anything we do repeatedly, the brain learns to do more efficiently. True, false. Anything we do repeatedly. The answer is true. Anything we do repeatedly, good, bad, or ugly, right? So if you are getting stressed out and you're like, okay, I'm going to do a little yoga, I'm going to meditate, your brain will get very efficient at thinking stress, yoga, stress, meditate, okay? But if maybe you're like, I'm going to have the cookie, I'm all stressed out, I'm just going to have the cookie, your brain will get very efficient at saying stress, need cookie, stress, need, okay? All right, anything we do repeatedly, okay, is getting efficient at. So that's like no pressure, right? Okay, you can still have a cookie sometimes. Don't worry, it's okay. Okay, all right. So now I'm going to show you a quick thing about using socks. This is a great little video, and just kind of watch her for a minute, this little toddler, and see if you can keep track of how many times she does this. And I'll tell you that her activity started sometime before the video started, and it continues after the video ends. Okay, so I'll just.
So you can really tell the children are not doing this for the purpose of putting on. Yes. That's great. You have to email that to me.
Okay. Can you believe that? Is that like crazy? Like, are you like, is she going to keep going? Is she going to keep going? Like, what did you guys think? Some of you look so intent on that. You were smiling and shaking your head, right? Like Danette, I saw you smiling and shaking your head. What did you think when you were watching her? Can you unmute Danette?
I was trying to read her body language. Was she enjoying it or was she frustrated? I was just trying to understand, as the person who commented, is she going to keep doing it? Yeah.
Yeah. And what did you think? Was she focused? What did her body language tell you?
Well, I think she was enjoying it. I think she just loved the fact that she was accomplishing something, so she could do it over and over. There was some amount of joy there. I was looking for some frustration, but there was none. So I think she was really enjoying it because she had accomplished something and she wanted to keep doing it over and over.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. Melissa, do you agree with what Danette said? I saw you shaking your head as you were watching it. Can you unmute?
Yes. I think definitely she found something that she needed to practice, and she just kept practicing.
Yeah, I think so. And Melissa Romero, you were also shaking your head.
Yes, and someone put in the chat too, I like how she's not being interrupted. And there's another quote. Of course, I don't want to do it because it won't be word for word, but it talks about Dr. Montessori talking about adult interference and interruption. It's always just, and she uses the example of the tying of the shoe. It's like just at that moment when you almost can't take it anymore and you want to interfere, that the child will accomplish that, and you would have ruined everything for that child.
Yeah, that's like such a challenge, isn't it? Because you don't want the child to be so struggling that they're frustrated, right? But you want them to work through it and to be able to get there, because what's actually happening in her brain right there where she's doing it, right? She's growing connections. She's refining and pruning her connections in her brain. And it's funny, what I really find, there's so many interesting things about this. I mean, she doesn't notice the kid walking right around her, right? There's these noises, whatever. She's just on her socks. But her eyes aren't always on her socks, are they? Her eyes are looking around the room, right? So you can't always tell where someone's attention is by their eyes, because it's clear that her attention is 100% on her socks, right? That's what she's doing, the socks and the feet. That's not where she's always looking. So I think that's, for me, that's a really important lesson, because sometimes we're like, well, what are they doing? They're looking around, but they can still be focusing on something with their muscles, with the rest of their body. It's not just the visual system that's doing it. So did anyone count? And do you want to put that in the chat if you got a count of how many times she actually did put on and off the socks? You got 50. Yeah, I think it was about, I think it was about that many. And actually, you could hear at one point, you could hear the adult saying that she had already done it 30 times before this started. So she's just going, and she kept going after this ended, right? So this is just like what she needs to do. This is what she needs to do, okay? And I'm good at putting on socks. I don't need to put her socks on for her. I can do it myself. I don't need to practice. She's the one who needs to practice. So we need to let her do it, right? Okay. So I want to just think of some other examples of repetition that you've seen, okay? And you can put them in the chat, or you can unmute and share. These can either be examples that you've seen in yourself, in children, or in others where you've seen repetition. So Dylan, did you want to tell us about what you were thinking? What examples of repetition have you seen, Dylan?
I mean, I would say, like, in myself, I try to continue with a very steady routine, but I have a problem sticking to it. So lately it's been having to redo it over and over again and remind myself of it every night to make sure I stick to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that'll do it, right? Anything we do repeatedly, the brain gets more efficient at. And when we talk about plasticity, you'll see that we have to do a little more, have to make a little more effort sometimes to get those new skills, procedures ingrained, but we can totally do it. It just takes more persistence sometimes. And when we're little, it's like, boom, easy peasy lemon squeezy, right? Okay. And who else wanted to share something about that? What other examples of repetition have you seen that have been really Interesting. Yourself or classroom. Jane Flynn, did you see anything? Because you were looking really intent when you were looking at that video. It seemed like you were really engaged. What did you want to say? Go ahead.
Yeah, just so many times in the classroom, children repeat, if we don't interfere with them, with just about everything they do.
Mm-hmm. What's one that sticks out in your mind?
Well, trying to put a coat on when you're going out in Michigan to play, or your snow pants.
And do you see them practicing that in the classroom, taking it on and putting it on?
Oh, yeah. It takes a lot of patience as a teacher when you're trying to get 20 of them dressed in Michigan.
Yeah. Yeah. We have the same thing in Massachusetts. Yeah. So do you have the opportunity for them to practice that outside of just the moment you're like, okay, we're going out in 10 minutes?
Oh, yeah. We work on that just one item at a time as winter approaches.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
I had to break it down.
You're lucky. Yeah, putting on mittens, Fariba says.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's one. Sure, because they get, and gloves, forget it. Gloves are really tricky.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Yoga socks. You ever done that with yoga socks? I'm still practicing with my toes on my yoga socks. That's harder to do. Those are the socks I need to practice. Okay, Gia says her daughter would draw the same character over and over and over again. In a day, she would draw about 30 to 50 times of just the same character. Gia, do you want to tell us more about that? How old was she when she was doing that, Gia?
So we found out that she was very interested in drawing when she was really young. And she started about like 4 years old. She would just start drawing with crayons. And then she would use more sophisticated stuff, definitely, like when she grows older. She's now 7 years old. But since she's 4, she would be drawing every single day. And at first was just me printing out some outlines of the characters that she likes, perhaps like from a Disney movie. And she would ask me to print it out over and over again. And she would color it like nonstop, just the same character. And then you can see she gets better after she does it over and over again. And she doesn't ask for like a lot of different characters. She just, once she sets on that character, she just wants you just to print out that one character like over and over again. And then now she watches a lot more things, and she has more characters that she likes. But for a period of time, she would just practice drawing on this one character. And you can see her just like drawing on a piece of paper or a couple pieces of paper, but just doing this one person like over and over and over again. And I personally, I can't really see the difference, but just after a while, like after I don't look at her for like a week, and then I notice, wow, she's getting better at her drawing for this one character. And she's very persistent in this aspect, and not everything, but just for drawing, I noticed that this is really her thing.
Wow. So this is so great because you've brought in so many human tendencies are just revealed in that little example, because right there, what I see is not only just repetition, but it's intertwined with that drive for self-perfection, right? And self-correction. She's not asking you to fix it. She's just she's trying to get better and better and better. She wants to be precise. So the human tendency for precision is also in there, and repetition. They're all mixed in there. Wow, gee, that's a great example. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So I want to move on to this other aspect of repetition is dynamic skill theory. So this is my first professor who taught the mind brain education course at Harvard, the late professor Kurt Fisher. He developed dynamic skill theory based on his research and looking at the ERPs, the electrical potentials of EEG work. And he found some really interesting things, but I'll translate it into really common, understandable stuff. So here we have your skill, okay? Your skill level increasing over time. And what we're actually doing is we think sometimes that we're like, okay, we learn it, we're done. But it doesn't work that way. We actually learn it, right? And so let me give this. We learn it, and then that knowledge kind of falls apart a little bit. And then we get some scaffold, we get some support, we relearn it, right? Build it back together again. Knowledge falls apart a little bit. Relearn it, reconstruct it, deconstruct, reconstruct, deconstruct on the road to mastery until we're stable in what we can do and what we can't do, right? So this one example is today, right? You're gonna, later on today, you'll be like talking to somebody, oh, what did you do this morning? Oh, I was at this workshop. And like right now, you're like, oh, it's about repetition, it's about neural pruning and growth. We've got oligodendrocytes, myelinating axons. But tonight, you're going to be like, what was it about? And they'll be like, something about the brain. It was about the brain. Brain is really cool, brain and kids, right? Because your knowledge has fallen apart, right? It's deconstructed. But if you get back together with someone, say you're here with your other school colleagues today, and you go back on Monday, you're like, did you notice this part? Somebody says, do you notice this part about repetition? I see somebody repeating. And then all of a sudden your knowledge goes up because you get a little support, you get a scaffold, you read something, maybe you read the handout, right? Maybe you'll watch the Montessori Neuroscience video again or something like that. And your knowledge goes up. And then it's going to fall apart a little, it's going to go up. It's going to fall apart a little, it's going to go up. So it's this repeated application and deconstruction and reconstruction of the knowledge that leads us to mastery. Now, when we're testing, we're usually testing children or adults without any scaffolds, without any support. So we see this much lower functional level here. And if you've ever, how many of you have testing for your kids? Does anybody have to work with testing? I see one, I see a couple people, not too many, a couple. Okay. Yep. Genevieve. Okay. And yeah, so the testing, you might see that your student has a low score on like the math test or the language test, and you're like, but they do great. And you know, when they're using the number odds or they're using the alphabet, or they're great, and their test score is really low. Well, that's because all of the Montessori materials in the Montessori environment are scaffolds. They're supporting us and giving us help on the road to mastery, which is really ideal, right? Because we don't want to just be dropped alone. You don't want to jump to the third period right away. You want to have a lot of practice with everything so that you can master it. And that's what's happening here with dynamic skill development, okay? Repeated application and support. So as you master a skill, the brain actually becomes more efficient at using the skill. And here's this example of the brain areas an 11-year-old is using to read, right? And then the brain areas that a 38-year-old is using. It's a lot less real estate that's being used, right? And that's because, you guys know it, because they're not using a million jungle connections anymore. They have a super highlight that's getting them to what they need to do. So it's refined connections, longer connections are more efficient. And that means we have all this other brain real estate available for other things. So you may have noticed that when you're learning something and you're really focused, or the child, they're really focused, right? They can't handle one more thing, okay? They can't handle it. They're like, oh, you just lose it, right? Like it's like when you're driving in the car, right? You're driving in the car and you've got 3 kids in the back and the news is on and your phone rings, right? And then your kid says, Mom, can we? And you're just like, no, right? You're just like, I can't handle one more thing. You're maxed out. Your cognitive resources are overloaded, right? There's just too much going on. So we want to have these efficient, longer connections so that we can have more real estate available for other things. We don't want to tax ourselves. All right, we're going to do another 1-minute paper. And I want you to just think for a second and write it down. We'll do 1 minute. I'll time it. What do children do slower than adults? And write down 2 sides of the paper. And what do children do faster than adults? And you can think of any age that you want to. Ready? Go. So let's hear somebody who might want to share. You can either type it in or you can share it out. Things they do slower or faster. And we've got Denise saying slower getting dressed, faster fall asleep. Oh, that's a great one, falling asleep faster. And Faruba says running faster. Okay. Who else has something they'd like to share? Faster, slower. Slower, fine motor tasks. Melina. Yeah, I think so, huh? For many of them. Fine motor activities. Debbie. Slower managing emotions. Anne, that's really interesting. I want to ask you, Anne, if you can unmute yourself, because managing emotions, that's really interesting. Because I heard somebody say once, they were like, they thought the children were faster with compassion and faster to forgive. So tell me what you're thinking about when you talk about managing emotions.
Okay. Okay. Well, full confession here. I help with the Brain Injury Association in Michigan. So I might have a little bit, but as far as thinking through the steps of how to have self-control, and there's some logic to it. You have to kind of stop yourself. First, you have to say, identify the emotions. So you have to be aware of what those emotions are. Then you have to stop yourself, think of strategies that allow you to stop yourself. And that's all like frontal lobe, which is the last piece of your brain to really fully like start connecting to the whole function. So I mean, yes, they definitely are much more trusting right off the bat because they also don't have any filter to say this person's dangerous or I shouldn't trust them. They trick me. There's less experience to support suspicion, but as far as like management of emotion, that's really, it comes from experiences too. And so the first time in a classroom with a primary or a toddler, like that's difficult. That's a lot of work. That's their work, is getting to be around a lot of people. And when they infringe on your boundaries or do something you don't like, or you're told to do something you don't want to do, how do you manage that?
Yeah. So that's a really great observation. So you're talking about inhibitory control a lot is one of the things that they're slower at, that they're not as skilled at inhibitory control. Yeah, we're going to talk about that more a little later, 100%. But then they're faster. Did you put in something that they're faster at too? You did learning songs and actions. Oh, interesting. Because Cindy put in earlier about how you might repeat and repeat a song to try and learn the words to it. Even adults were doing that, right? To learn the words. But children, you think they get that faster. That's really interesting. And then Genevieve says, making friends. Genevieve, is that faster or slower that they're making friends? Can you unmute? You'll get there. Faster, she's saying. Okay, she can't make it unmute. Yeah, that's really interesting. And then, oh, I like it. And so slower, getting dressed faster, running. Kids can learn a second language faster. Stephanie. Okay, so Stephanie, that is a fantastic observation. They learn it with less effort. They absolutely can learn a language with less effort. But adults can learn it. Don't ever be discouraged. At any age, you can completely become fluent in another language. So that's definitely not something to limit you. And I love, and faster at forgiving. Fariba, would you unmute and tell us what you mean about faster at forgiving?
When they had lost fighting or something like that they don't get along together, they start, if you just talk to them, they start forgive each other. I think the adult is just harder to just do that. I don't know.
So we're holding grudges. Like maybe we have some really strong neural networks for grudging, for holding grudges. Oh.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. Wow. What a great observation. Okay. All right. These are great observations. So just keep that in mind when sometimes I know it can be a little difficult to have our patience with the children when we have to get going, but it just takes them longer to do things. But some things they're better at than us. It's so interesting, isn't it? All right. So here's a quiz. Here's another quiz. Are you ready? Pruning makes neural connections stronger, more efficient, or weaker and less efficient, or unreliable. What do you think? Pruning, stronger, more efficient, weaker and less efficient, unreliable. We're saying we've got a bunch of A's coming up in the chat. A. And the answer is A. You're correct. Longer and refined connections are more efficient. All right, you guys are doing great with these quizzes. I'm pretty excited for you. All right, now let's talk about this effort that's required for the brain to change. We'll talk about plasticity is the word we use for the capacity of the brain to change. And this red line is showing you up here, this is the amount of plasticity you have. And then this is age going across the bottom. And you can see here, you've got your normal plasticity influenced by experience. And you've got tons of it when you're little, right? This is like effortless plasticity. It's just like, boom, the brain is changing. Brain is changing. This is why they're like little tape recorders, right? Like you can't talk to your sister on the phone and then say so because your child's going to repeat it, right? To everybody, right? It's so effortless for them, for some things, so effortless. Okay. And then this is plasticity, this blue line going up, up, up. This is the effort required to induce plasticity and enhance our neural connections as we get older. So you can see when we're younger, effort is not as important as existence, but effort is much more important as we get older. Right? And this is part of the absorbent mind. You're just being and developing, and then everything's happening, right, in your brain. And that's why these rich environments that we provide are so essential for children. But as we get older, we don't lose our plasticity. This is super important for anybody. I can see a few of you who are a little bit older like me, and don't be discouraged, right? Because you can still, it's never too late. You just might have to work a little harder, like Dylan was saying about routines. You might have to make a little more effort to start a new routine and have it last longer. Don't be discouraged. It still will become effortless, right? Yeah, Lindsay, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? Okay. All right, so a sensitive period is a period of more plasticity. So a sensitive period is a period of optimum time when the young child is particularly susceptible to certain environmental stimuli. And so it's easiest to think of this. We start here with sensory on the left. There's this huge sensory period for the sensory development, right? And then motor and language, and then higher cognition comes later. So when we talk about sensory, an easy example is the visual system. The visual system, if you look at neurons in a child who has, say they were stillborn, right? And you look at their brain, and you will see that their visual system neurons just did not myelinate at all. But if you look at a child who was born, right, and had 1 month, even if they were born a month premature, and then they died at 9 months, they actually did this study. They looked at their brain, they saw that 1 month of experience led to this dramatic change in myelination of the visual system. So it's the experience that changed the brain. It wasn't just genetically programmed. The child had to have input from the world in order to develop their brain. There are some systems that are like that. They're called experience-dependent plasticity, right? So experience is so essential for many of our systems to fully develop. And risk and protective factors are also influencing our plasticity. So risk and protective factors are a really interesting concept. I know I was working in high poverty school where we had a lot of trauma. And trauma, of course, if you look at these risk factors, you can see trauma is one of them. Parents with substance abuse or mental illness, family disharmony, low self-esteem, a negative thinking style. You'd see many children with this negative thinking style already, even when they were little, right? Or they were discriminated against, or they had some isolation, they had poverty. Those are all risk factors. It makes it harder for the body and the brain to develop optimally when they have those challenges. But risk factors don't live in isolation. Protective factors are on the other side of that scale. And so we can absolutely influence those risk factors and balance them out by implementing protective factors. And like having, being optimistic, training yourself to be optimistic, having a stable and harmonious family, right? Having a positive school climate. I'm sure you're all in schools with positive school climates. Involvement with a caring adult, right? Participation in the community, economic security. There are many ways protective factors can be implemented to balance those out. So if you are somebody maybe who has had a tricky background, that means you have a lot of risk factors. It's not a death sentence. You're not doomed. Things can change, right? But you have to make extra effort to implement those protective factors, right? Everything that you can do to really support your well-being, you have to be diligent about and conscious of, whereas people who have a lot of protective factors, it's already automatic for them, okay? But it means that it's possible for everybody, so don't be discouraged. Don't be discouraged. That's my big message here. Everything's possible. And even for your children who have a lot of risk factors, it's okay. They can overcome. We just have to work more on protective factors, because plasticity can be positive or negative. Right now, I know you guys have seen this. I know you guys have seen negative plasticity, maybe like in your brother or someone, like, you know, you're like, what? They're what are they doing? Right? They're doing it wrong. You're like, why are they doing that? Oh no, they're doing that. Okay, that's negative plasticity. So things that they do that are not good for them, like non-stimulating activities, like social isolation, which we've all had to deal a lot with in the past year and a half. Poor emotional health, a sedentary lifestyle, that's negative neuroplasticity it's inducing. Inadequate nutrition, inadequate sleep, which I think is a challenge for a lot of people these days. Substance abuse, another challenge that's really common. But then positive plasticity is things like mental stimulation, right? Your Sudoku games, right? If you're playing Sudoku, or engaging with people, you know, in a book club. That's mental stimulation. Intellectual pursuits, learning another language, right? Learning a new piece for a musical instrument. Social interaction, good emotional health, right? Volunteering is great for social interaction. Proper nutrition, proper sleep, right? And any kind of cognitive remediation therapy that you might need to support your shift from negative to positive, right? These are all things. So every day, this is contributing to our positive, to our everyday functioning. And positivity and patterns of thinking really matter, okay? So these habits that we have of mind make a big difference for us. Our internal narratives are actually creating physical brain networks. It's not just physically, okay, I'm getting strong, you know, motor skills. It's mental thinking pattern skills are developing too. Those are also neural networks. And this is example from a research that shows these areas that are more active when we're thinking positively about the future. those are areas that are show irregularities in depression. Okay, so this is how this works. It actually matters. If we're working with depression, we have to train ourselves to do these other things. We have to try, and it will take a lot longer because we're challenged and because we have this negativity bias. All right, who knows about the negativity bias? Have you guys heard of it? Have you seen it? I see Lisa shaking her head. Yeah, I see Genevieve has not heard of it before. Anybody else? Lindsay's heard of it. Okay, so the negativity bias is basically saying that we are programmed to survive and succeed, and negative things they raise our threat awareness, right? So we remember them more, we pay more attention to them. So we actually have this affinity that shifts a little as we age, where negative things are more weighty to us than positive things. So we need like 3 positive, optimistic things to outweigh the negative things, okay? And this is like really important for thriving. So one of the things that we can do for this is try to reframe our thinking. Okay, and this is the joke portion of the workshop. Are you ready? So here's the negative thought. Okay, it's going to be funny, so you have to laugh. Okay, so, all right, pessimistic thought. That politician is horrendous. Okay, so let's reframe it to an optimistic alternative. This is our chance to see if the checks and balances in our government really work. Okay, here's another. He totally has ADHD. He has ADHD, right? We jump to that. Okay, reframe it. His interests are broad, right? Getting into everything, but he's interested in everything. Okay, the child is absolutely out of control. Okay, reframe it. This child is just starting to develop his executive functions. He'll get there, hopefully soon. Okay, so this is really important to try to reframe our thinking. So I want to do, if we can, Erin, do some breakout rooms here. I want you guys to take a minute we'll do 5 minutes in the breakout room, and just think of a situation where you've seen the negativity bias and how you might reframe it. And it could be in yourself, it could be in someone else, it could be, you know, a child or a colleague. How might you reframe that situation effectively? Or how could you have improved the way you frame the situation? Okay, so think about that. So we'll do 5 minutes in a breakout room where you can try to come up with your own example of negativity, and then we'll share it out. So please be prepared to share. One person, you can decide who will be the sharer. Okay, so Erin, if you can send us as soon as you're ready. So go ahead, Debbie. We'll be your breakout room group.
I think what popped into my mind was we are Bible believers, and so we run into that because that's part of our program that we teach. And when I interview families, we're housed in a church. And so when we talk about, when they come to visit, they see that. And when we talk about what we offer in our program, we talk about the Montessori side of the education. And then I'm music trained, so we do that. And then we include the Bible. And they will sit there and look at us like we're crazy. Well, we don't do religion. And I'm thinking in my head, you came to a church to see a preschool. So there are some biases there, negative biases. How do you handle that? And just say that, well, this is what we offer, and would you allow me to show you? And then they have that information in their mind to decide yes or no. Is this what we want? And surprisingly, the 2 families that happened to me with, they actually signed their kids up. And I'm starting to think, is it because we didn't write them off with our biases of you don't believe what we believe, but we were welcoming, and maybe they felt that. And I'm still in the process of that one, so I don't have a thing of how can I do that differently.
Yeah, you have to do it all the time to reframe.
Right.
Yeah, that's
But
really good.
It's interesting to see that, because it's like, wow, usually we're the one doing it, but that was the time where I experienced a little bit of the negativity, and okay, how do I handle it from that side?
Yeah, for sure. Because it's so important that you are accessible and open with parents so that they feel like they can approach you. I mean, this is, being a parent, it's one of the most tender and, exposed things that we do in our lives. And we're doing it, especially with our teachers, right? And so having that strength of a relationship where they don't feel threatened by you it's key.
Right. And that helps us with our, we always say we want to have that trust so that if there's anything at home that happens, they feel free to say it. If there's anything that happens at school, we can feel free to say it, and we're partnership. If you don't establish that from the beginning, how are you going to get anywhere?
Yeah. So as you guys are coming back, Debbie had a little trouble in her breakout room, and it looks like Genevieve did too. So I apologize for that. If you have a breakout room, I think some people had luck in their breakout rooms too, though. I think we probably had a little bit of each. So if you do have trouble in the breakout room, you can always come back to the main room, and we'll try to support you in the main room if that doesn't work for some reason. So we've still got a bunch more people coming back. Let's see. All right, but why don't we start with somebody? So is there somebody who wants to speak out about what they came up in their room? Anybody who's chomping at the bit?
I don't mind.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Okay, so one day, like, we have this student, and actually my coworker kind of opened my eyes to this with the like negative versus positive. So we have this student who's like naturally destructive and just wants to like tear things apart. And naturally I'm like, hey, don't do that. Like, that's not what this is for. And she was like, hold on, like, he's not actually hurting anything. His natural, instinct is to take it apart. So we're let's give him something to take apart. Like, so we turned that negative into a positive, and that really stuck with me. So Patty, if you're out there, what's up?
Stephanie, what a great example. It reminds me of my own son. We used to call it, his name's Dante. We used to call it the Dante disassembly, because he was just taking everything apart in the house. That's just like what he did.
Yeah. She's like,
She
said, we don't want to tell him no all the time. So we need to just cater it to him. And I'm like, yeah, makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. Who else? And Melissa's raising her hand down there. Melissa.
We work together. What's up, Melissa?
Oh, okay.
Oh, is it me? Are you talking about?
Yes, Melissa.
Oh, there's another Melissa.
A bunch. I have no voice, just so you know. It's been like this for a week, but anyway.
Steph, mute your microphone. Steph, mute your microphone.
So for me, it's kind of a similar story. And I think it's funny because my coworker actually was the one that pointed it out to me as well. I teach 5th and 6th grade. So I have the same students for 2 years, and it was a 5th grader, and now he's a 6th grader. And last year, he was really a difficult student for me. He constantly was shouting out, wanting to share things that were just obscure, not what we were doing, had really difficulty controlling his body. It was really a challenge with the other students for me to teach a lesson, because he was constantly interrupting and really challenging me. And it ended up being a constant everyday struggle. And my coworker had said, we need to go in there and realize that what he needs is not academic. He's trying to show you he needs something beyond that. So I kind of reframed my mindset over the summer and tried to understand, like, what is it that he needs? And now coming back this year, I look at him under a whole different lens. He notices things in the room, and the facts that he's shouting out, the things he's telling me are far beyond what the students in my lesson are noticing. And he really is intellectually far above the rest of us, really. And what he needs is a challenge. What he needs is to be able to share something beyond the lesson. What he needs is to be able to, be challenged beyond what I'm showing him. So it's kind of similar to what the person before me had said, is I really followed his lead, followed the child. And he showed me that with guidance, he could go even beyond what I was showing him. And it helped me to reframe my mindset as well.
Oh, wow. That's a really great example, especially when you're faced with those challenging students. It can be so hard, to try and get through everything when you feel like they're disrupting the environment, and you're like, how do I honor this child and honor the needs of everyone in the room? And I think your approach sounds really fantastic, that you're trying to find what they really need so that they can get engaged in something. That's a great example, Melissa. Mandy, your hand is raised. You wanted to share.
Yeah, I was just going to share from our group. At first, we were mostly focusing on, our experiences as teachers with our students, and, the idea of trying to have a fresh mindset in the morning, right? Every kid gets a new slate, and how that can be really difficult when you have students with some challenging behaviors. that you're like expecting it, you're looking for it, you're like waiting for it. But then also another participant was talking about her son and his focus on the negativity. And so then we started to think about like how a student, or like a child, they have this amazing day, right? They get a hole in their paper and like the whole day is ruined, right? Or for older students, like you're giving feedback on work and you're saying lots of wonderful things, but you might have like one point of criticism. And that for some students, like in their mindset, like they've done a terrible job and totally failed. So that was an important kind of like change of perspective for me, was that our students also have this bias towards the negativity or bias towards the negative. So just remembering that.
Yeah, Mandy. And actually, I just saw some research that it's stronger in children than it is in older adults. As we get older, we tend towards the positive more. And so that's just developmentally how it works. And so it's particularly strong that error monitoring area of the brain really starts to refine itself, right? It like peaks right around age 13. And that's why our adolescents are noticing, especially with their parents, everything we make a mistake on, right? That's normal development. They're noticing errors and they're noticing their own errors like crazy, right? They're hyper sensitive to their own error making. And that's part of that developmental process, which is normal. And that negativity bias is more pronounced in the younger humans than it is in older. It tends to get, well, unless you're a curmudgeon, right? I guess that it's worse when you're older. Christina, your hand is raised. What did you want to say?
Hi, first off, I have a lot of activity here, so I apologize for the background noise. I just wanted to say I just got done reading this book called What Happened to You, and it's written by a neuroscientist and then a thought leader. But it's basically a reframing of the phrase, what's wrong with you? So instead of saying what's wrong with this child, it's what happened to you. And it focuses on trauma and how that impacts young children and kind of the neuroplasticity behind their development when they go through trauma at a young age. So I thought that was kind of relevant to this question of, how do you reframe something?
Yeah, Christina, I love it. The title itself is the key rephrasing. Instead of what's wrong with you, what happened to you? I love it. I love it. Oh, that's a keeper. I'm writing that one down. What happened to you? Okay. I'll have to read that book on my list. Lisa, go ahead.
I wanted to share two things. One from my breakout. We were discussing the propensity for one negative thing to really outweigh the positive. And I remembered something that I utilized with my children who are now grown when they were young. If there was something very harsh that one of the children said to the other child, typically it was the older saying it to the younger, I would bring them together and I used to tell the offending child that they had to now tell the younger, the child who was given the verbal negativity, that they had to think on things liked about that child. And so not only did the offending child have to reframe their thinking, but then the other child got an opportunity to hear the 10 things that, I'd love to play with you. You're great with crayons, you're whatever. And it was, I'm now an early childhood teacher, and I was trying to think about how I could use that in my classroom. And our group discussed that, really cued a lot of creativity within our group, and we discussed how that could be used at circle time, just as a without the negative comment, just having a time where the students could reflect a positive comment back to a classmate. So that was one thing. The second point I was going to make was, I've learned that within my own classroom environment, when I make mistakes, it's important for me, no matter what they are, whether I drop something or I make a mistake in my relationship with a child, that I acknowledge that publicly and usually pretty loudly to the child. Mm-hmm. And then I reframe it for them and for myself. Oh, look at me. There I go. I made a mistake. But you know what? Everybody makes mistakes. And that seems to give me a segue to always work with a child who has giving themselves negative verbal feedback that I can.
Yeah. Oh, you brought up this great memory in me of this student I had, Ani, who's still a friend of mine. She just had her first baby. Oh my gosh, one of my old students. It's so exciting. And she used to say to me, she was so loud, oh, so loud. And I was like, oh, I did something. And she would just go, Julia, did you make a mistake again? And I was just like, I did. Just crack me up every time. She was so cute the way she did that. But I think you're right. To model our own mistakes, Lisa, is really, really key. But I wanted to hear, Teresa, what you had to say. But I also wanted to know how you felt about what Lisa said about modeling this process of find something positive to say about them or something like that. Do you have any comments on that? Do you agree with what Lisa said? Teresa McPherson, that's the one whose hand is raised. Are you frozen? Oh, she looks fantastic, like she's ready to talk, but I think she's frozen.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
the internet seems to be cutting in and out at our house. I'm not sure. Okay, so I wasn't catching everything that she was saying, but I guess what it made me think about was that all behavior is communication when she was talking. And I had to join the session late, so you may have already discussed that. But I work with Children's House, and I don't have an assistant right now, so there is some behavior that I miss and don't necessarily see what happened before that. So I do have to consciously remind myself, okay, what may have happened? What are they trying to communicate to me? And what I was telling my group is I have a child who was tearing apart. I noticed from across the room that she was tearing apart a beehive that I had on display for the kids to use with a magnifying glass. My first natural reaction, like one of my Breakout Rooms members said, was like, I want to be like, oh, no, we don't do that. But I had to just stop myself. I was working with another child. And since I didn't have an assistant that was also going to do that, I just kind of had to let it happen and observe what was she maybe trying to do. And then I finally got her attention and I was like, just come here. And I just whispered to her, like, what are you doing? What were you trying to do? And she wanted to know if there was bees in there. And I said, okay, well, next time you want to, you're curious or you're wondering about something, let me know and I'll maybe find another way we can do that. But I found out from her stepmom, who I thought was actually her mom, they're new to our program, that she's going through a lot of trauma right now. So it really, it was just a huge eye-opening reminder that behavior is communication, and her birth mom has left and isn't coming back. And there's all these different things going on in her life right now that I will never look at her. I'll never look at any of the children through those eyes that I maybe had last week, because this was just yesterday. Because they all have so much going on. They all have their own story and we have no idea. And she's going through so many things right now that most adults don't have to go through. So we just have to remember that.
Yeah. Oh, Teresa, you just you brought a tear to my eye, because that is just so poignant. So many times we have this instinct to stop something, interrupt and be like, no, but you didn't do that. And you went with compassion first, compassion and curiosity. And what a difference that made, right? For that little girl. Oh my gosh. She was just, everything's crazy.
Yeah. I can think of other things that she's done previously to that I know I didn't react that way. And I was like, oh, had I only done, what Maria Montessori would have done. But we're all learning, and I make mistakes too. And I like Lisa had said, I make sure that I let them know that too, because without an assistant, I make a lot of mistakes right now. I forget to put out the glue, or I forget to do this or that. I'm like, yep, and there's certain children with a sense of order right now that definitely let me know when I forget those things.
Yeah. So it's like a blessing in some ways that you don't have an assistant, right? Because you have to give, unless it's, blood, right? Or blood or
Right.
vomit, right? Or bodily fluids. You
Yeah.
got to let it go and
Well,
stay with
in
your
it,
lesson.
that's the positive for me that I've been trying to remind myself of, okay, I don't have an assistant and this really isn't ideal. And it's my first year teaching on my own. And why, what's my positive on this? And I had a great mentor that I worked under and said, okay, they are learning so much more independence without an assistant. They don't cling to an assistant to help them open their snack. They're learning to communicate with the person at the table, with them.
Yes.
So there's a lot of little things, the little nuggets, the little takeaways each day that I'm trying to.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right. So I'm going to remember that, Teresa. That's my great example I'm so grateful for you for bringing that up. And Lindsay, we'll go to Lindsay and then we'll go to Mary and then we're going to move on to the next thing. So Lindsay, go ahead.
All right. So what I'm going to talk about, I don't think is new to any of us here. I think it's something that we all see in some capacity whenever we have parent-teacher conferences, and we sit down and we talk with the parents. But more specifically, I teach elementary and adolescents, and once a year we do standardized testing, not because we have to, but because it's something that gives the parents some comfort, and also it helps us track student learner outcomes. But as we all know, what a child remembers in one moment on one day of their entire year isn't necessarily reflective of everything they know and can do. However, it's how all of our parents are used to measuring and assessing their own child's progress and success within the Montessori environment, which is hard because sometimes parents are a hard sell on staying for elementary, particularly upper elementary, and then adolescence. So we just had our conferences, and last year we did the standardized testing, and we hadn't done it the year before because of the lockdown and the year ending abruptly. So last year when we came back to do it, it was many of our students' first time taking a test ever. And so when we had conferences with all of this year's current 6th levels, their parents had looked at their 5th level test scores after a year of learning in a mask, and after a year that had ended abruptly where they hadn't had the opportunity to take a test before. And the test scores were pretty discouraging. And it's hard not to take that to heart. It's hard to really keep that perspective of like, we just had 18 months of real craziness and adjustment, and trying to focus on the positive and trying to see things, trying to see progress where it was. And this year being maybe just as hard, but for different reasons. So I guess the point of what I was saying is the negativity bias that already existed in talking about test scores, and then talking about test scores with parents after their child had been through 18 months of a pandemic, was really something that came to the forefront of a couple of conferences this year. And I found it somewhat hard to refocus the parent on the other wonderful aspects of the child, and not be just too hard on their own child.
Yeah, that's a big exercise in reframing, isn't it? To try and put things, but it's for the parent, but it's also for us, right? Because we don't want to be seeing the child from a deficit view. We don't want to have the deficit mindset that, oh my gosh, I've got to get that kid working on the math because he just bombed the standardized test and it's all my fault, right? We don't want to have the deficit view and have like guilt causing this craziness, right? So the reframing is essential for the parents, for us, and for the child. So we don't start to treat them differently.
I think it's interesting to tie that information back with that phrase, what happened to you? Because a lot of times it's something that happened to the parents, or maybe they're feeling really competitive with the sibling and their nephews are doing really well. And why aren't their children doing as really well? And there must be something wrong, or there must be something wrong with the program. And why should we invest? So it's this tangled web of complexity that I think many of us just don't have the energy for this year. It's like, all right, I'm going to dig deep and try to figure out how to navigate this. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's great. And Mary, do you have something similar to what Lindsay was saying, or is your idea separate?
I'm going to jump right off what she said. Okay. So I think as an administrator, it's important to carve out time for your staff to interact with each other so they can talk in a positive manner. I think sometimes we're in the classroom so much, we don't have a chance to interact with each other. So in our environment, we try to have 2 lunches set up. So we can meet together in the lunchroom in groups and have conversations during lunch. So if we're feeling negative, we can help each other turn it around into something positive. So I think as an administrator, it's really important to allow time for your staff to socialize.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that's a great thing. And actually, that's one thing we miss at these virtual conferences, isn't it? Because right now I'm going to suggest we take a 10-minute bio break. And normally you talk to 6 people while you're waiting in line, right? At the bathroom or for coffee, right? And we don't get to do that today. Okay. So, but I will say that we should take a 10-minute bio break and just, really be strict with yourself. So 10:30, we'll be starting back up. But do take a minute. Really important for you to stretch, even if you don't actually need, to do anything. At least get up, stretch, walk around a little bit. That'll make your brain smarter. And we'll talk more about that when we get back, okay? All right, so 10 minutes and come right back. Hello, I can see we've got some people wandering back into the room now. I'm not like at the conference where I can turn off the lights or something. Time to get back.
Julia?
Yeah.
Just before you begin, I just wanted to mention one thing that I don't know if I froze on your intro or when I was introducing you, but I wanted to mention Maitri Learning. And I wanted to let everyone know that through the month of November, Maitri Learning is giving us 10% off. So please visit her website. And I know that Erin's going to be typing in the website that you can go to Maitri Learning and see some wonderful language and geography materials that you can put into your classrooms. I love them and the children love them. And every year it seems like they just keep getting better and better. A lot of the newer things. There's a wonderful cork apron that I've used in my table washing exercise, and it is just a beautiful piece of material. It's just made so well. So I encourage everyone to please visit the site.
Are you using the cork apron for table washing? Really? I always thought that'd be shoe polishing more. Table washing, really?
It's wonderful. They love it. It's just made so well, and it's water resistant, and it matches my table washing really well. So, the cork placemat is also very nice to use as well.
I love it. I love the cork. It's so soft. It's so nice. It's a great fabric. So we could talk about sewing instead of the brain if you want. We're making new pouches. Okay. No, but we should get back. All right. So I should probably start sharing my screen again, Cindy, and we should get started. I know not everyone is back, but people are mostly back. So we'll move right along and get to it. Okay. All right. So we're going to start first. Jung, it's just so good to see you again. Hi, I miss you, Jung. And Jan. Hello, Jan. We're going to start with the quiz. Are you ready? Let's see if you guys could remember anything that we did already this morning. This is going to help you reconstruct some knowledge. So first, just thinking about something is not enough. We have to physically do something to master knowledge. This is a tricky question. Just thinking is not enough. We have to physically do something to master knowledge. True or false? And you don't have to say it. You can just think it if you think true or false. You're welcome to put in the chat or you don't have to. All right, here's the answer. The answer is false. Fariba is right. We humans are continually constructing ourselves based on things we do both externally and internally. Contemplation, patterns of thinking, and internal self-reflection count. And there's actually some fun research studies on this where they did research on people who were practicing a skill like playing piano, and they were rehearsing on the piano versus thinking about playing the piece, rehearsing just in their mind. Whether they were playing the piano or they were rehearsing it in their mind, the same parts of their brain became active, but to a lesser degree if it's just rehearsing in the mind. So you're still effective when you're thinking about things, even if it's a skill. If you can still help influence your outcomes and your capacity with that just by thinking it through. Thinking is incredibly powerful. It's really powerful. Okay, so let's talk about brain networks. And experience is wiring our distant brain areas into effective connectivity networks. You need your whole brain to do anything. So if anybody's like left brain, left brain, it's baloney. It's whole brain, okay? There are networks and hubs that do tend to do more, but they don't work in isolation. Everything is going all the time. Okay, so it's never just one or the other. And here's an example of the networks we need for reading, right? All of them. You see, the whole brain is involved in reading, right? It's not just one thing. And similarly with our attention networks, we have all these different areas of the brain involved. It's not like here's the attention spot, right? No, it's everywhere. There's a lot of stuff. Another really interesting thing that we have to keep in mind is Montessorians, we're already kind of down with this, but our movement areas are intrinsically connected with thinking regions. So you can see in this graphic, you've got these red areas are cognitive areas and blue areas are motor areas. They're like, boom, they're all together. And actually, I just saw new research on this, that your frontal motor areas, right? The connectivity between them mediates your cognitive processing speed. It mediates your thinking speed on those connections. So the more you're integrating your motor areas, the faster you'll be thinking. Okay, so with that in mind, I know we're all in our cameras and we might have not laptops, but I want you to stand up, even though we're, here, and I'll do my example here. I'll stand up. If you monitor your step count each day, are you ready? Okay, stand up. Stand up if you monitor. Okay, I'm looking. I see a lot of people standing with the step count. Okay, next. Let's see. Stand up if you exercised this morning or will definitely exercise later today. I'm standing up. Exercise this morning. Anybody else? ZA is standing up. Genevieve is standing up. Danielle is standing up. Nice. Ashley. Okay. All right. Sit back down. This is the stand up, sit down part of the workshop. Okay. Stand up if you want to exercise, but find it hard to make time. Stand up if you're not. Yep. Madison, I hear that. That's really common. Really common. Denise, Kimberly, excellent. Okay. Are you ready? And here's the last one. Stand up if you've had it with exercise. You're like, I don't care. Stephanie's raising her hand. Okay. She's like, done with that. All right. Okay. So let me we know about the importance of movement and thinking in our work for children, and we're a little behind. So I'm going to move on past this. I want to tell you that exercise is both neuroprotective and neuroregenerative. Okay. What does that mean? It means when you exercise, your brain makes good stuff. Okay. Lots of good stuff. And brain-derived neurotrophic factor is one of the key things that it makes. It's really important for the brain and it helps a ton. So even if especially if you've been ill, you're recovering, you want to do as much as you can, even if it's tiny. I remember when I had my hip replaced, I couldn't lift my leg properly when my hip failed. So I just had to lift it once. The physical therapist is like, do 10. And I'm like, I'll do 1, right? 1. And then, the next day I tried to do 2, and then I had to do 2 for a couple days before I could do 3. So even if it's a tiny, tiny amount, it makes a huge difference. Do as much as you can, Okay, here's the story about John Pepper. Anybody know the story of John Pepper and Parkinson's disease? Donna is shaking her head. So some people of you have heard it before. So John Pepper developed Parkinson's when he was in his 30s. He was an ardent exerciser, gym guy, right? Really into it. And then his progression of symptoms ended him up in a wheelchair over the course of a few years. And he was totally dependent on medication. He couldn't do much of anything. And he was really depressed. His wife made him start, I love that, his wife made him start a gradual conscious walking program back in 1990s, okay? Today he's in his late 80s, he's strong and medication free. Now, I'm not saying that anybody can do this, but I'm saying that when you put your mind to it, he had to start, he was used to running. He was used to all this crazy exercise. He had to walk 10 feet. That's what he could walk. And he did that for 2 weeks. And then he could walk 20 feet. And he did that for 2 weeks. And then he slowly increased in 2-week increments the amount he was able to walk independently without his wheelchair, with all of his attention, so he wasn't falling and shuffling, right? So he could do it really carefully. And to go very slowly, but he got there. That's intentional plasticity. That's that blue line, remember, that we saw going up, our way of positively influencing our plasticity. So we have one more poll, and I don't know, Erin, if you can pull that up. And I just wanted to hear from you on what you think matters more. Genetics, like Parkinson's is a genetic disease, right? Environment, like illness or injury, right? Or nutrition, physical activities, mental activities. What do you think matters more? And you can choose more than one. So you can go ahead and put your vote in. Erin, are you seeing any votes coming in?
Yes, there's quite a few.
Okay.
And it's pretty evenly dispersed.
Is it so far? There's no forerunner? Who's in the lead? Who's in the lead? 4
Lead
lengths
is
ahead?
mental activities.
Mental activities is in the lead. Curious. Okay. Everybody had a chance to vote?
Yep. All right.
All right, go ahead and share.
We're at
Let's
about
see.
75 votes.
All right, we got 10 more seconds. Put your vote in. Put your vote in. And Mandy chose them all, right? Okay, and here we go. All right, and mental activities is the winner. Interesting, with lifestyle next, environment next, and genetics the least important. Oh my gosh, you guys are so optimistic. I have to tell you, you're so optimistic. Okay, so the truth is they all matter, as you all got. None is definitely more important than the rest. So mental activities is not more important than everything else. It's equally important. You can't actually separate genetics and environment and activity. You can't separate them. They're completely intertwined, playing off each other all the time. We like to think that we can overcome anything. You know, we hear a story of John Pepper and Parkinson. He overcame that genetic thing. Well, not everybody can do that. Stephen Hawkins couldn't overcome his ALS. He was wheelchair bound. There's nothing he could do. You know, we cannot always just mind over matter, right? We can't, but there's a lot that we can influence. I think sometimes it's tricky for us in our culture because we have this really strong mind over matter idea. We could just do it, which is great. But it's tricky for us sometimes to accept things that we can't change. And sometimes with our students, there are things that we can't change, but we can work with what they do have that can help them change. So anyway, they're all important. They all matter. And one thing I wanted to bring to your attention about John Pepper's story is that his program was a gradual conscious walking program. So he was putting all of his attention on his feet and how they felt when they were walking, right? Because where we put our attention really matters. Now, here are attention networks again. We have the alerting, which makes us say, oh, I have to pay attention. Something's there, alert. We have orienting, where we focus on that thing instead of that thing. And then we have executive. Executive is where we decide to stay focused. We're like, okay, I'm gonna get through this, and you stick with it no matter what, okay? And these three systems and networks are working together. This sustaining effort requires a lot, sustaining attention requires a lot of effort, and that's called top-down or executive attention, right? Because we decide to sustain our attention somewhere, unless we're really interested in what we're doing. And then that's flow. Flow is effortless and complete attention because we're completely absorbed. I think everybody's experienced it, right? We're completely absorbed, right? We perceive nothing else. Time passes, you haven't eaten, you haven't gone to the bathroom, right? All of a sudden, like you finish whatever you're totally focused on and you're like, and you feel, right? Like there's a sense of yes. And then only a couple minutes later, you realize, oh my gosh, I really have to go to the bathroom. You know, like, oh, I'm so thirsty, right? It takes a while before you realize it. Some examples of that might be playing music, really focused on practicing a piece, or computer games are very absorbent. They can get you into flow, actually, because the challenge is adaptive, right? Dancing. There are many examples, and I'm sure you have some. The flow is matching challenges with skill. We have this range of challenge level here from low to high, and skill level here from low to high. And flow is when we're perfectly matched, right? High challenge, high skill, but we have that skill level. Okay. It's not like we can't do it. And then if the challenge is too high and we're like, forget it. You know, I'm not interested. I'm not going there. It matches our skill level with the challenge level. And so arousal and control are two key places where we can kind of go from, because control is like, you're like, okay, I have the skill. I'm not lost. I can do it. I can push myself a little bit further, right? And so in the classroom, that's what we're going for, right, with our students. We're not going to do this because we don't have enough time. But I just want to ask you this question. Here's another quiz. If someone is not effortlessly learning something, it means A, they will never really be good at it. B, if they try hard enough, they can master anything. C, if they practice repeatedly, they will improve. Or D, both B and C. What do you think? We've got some votes coming in. C, Melina's in the C. Ooh, Mandy C. Ooh, we got a lot of C. A lot of people in the C column. Teresa's out there. Ooh, Fariba, you're out there with the D. Good for you. Okay. Yes, Spark by John Rady, Teresa. Love it. Okay. And the answer is, look at, I like the votes are in. The answer is C. If they practice repeatedly, they will improve. Intentional plasticity can help us improve our knowledge and skills at any age. But me, with my artificial hip, will never be a prima ballerina, okay? There's a lot I can do, but I'm not going to be on the stage with the Bolshoi. Okay, that's okay. That's part of mixing reality and intention and hope. So attention is essential for learning. It motivates us to repeat and rehearse. And joint attention increases our overall attention. And that's part of the reason why having our cameras on is really helpful in this. If you see people scrolling or reading their mail, and you can tell, right? When you see them, you can tell. Your attention goes to that, and it doesn't stay with what their focus is. So having the cameras on is actually quite helpful for this. So what do we do when we first see someone? We make eye contact, right? And then we follow their gaze. What are they looking at? You know, what are they looking at? So that's how it works. That's how our joint attention works. But our joint attention actually increases overall attention. Okay. There's this huge, and I'm sorry that didn't come up. There's this bump. You get a bump when we're all paying attention to the same thing. Our attention capacity is higher. So that focus is really helpful for people, particularly people who have challenges with attention. Joint focus can be quite helpful. So this interest also creates attention. When we're really interested in something, it makes it easier for us to pay attention to it. And I like to tell the story of these Nobel laureates. There's this inordinate number of Nobel laureates with severe dyslexia. You're like, what is up with that? Is that like they have a better brain? You're like, well, Rosalie Fink over at Lesley University did research on this. And she asked all these laureates, she's like, how were you able to persist and succeed in this reading intensive field when reading is so incredibly difficult for you? And the answer was all the same. They were so interested in the subject matter that they could persist, even though it was hard. It wasn't easy. It didn't like all of a sudden become easy for them to read, but they cared so much about what they were learning that they could go past it and overcome it. And this is why following the child, as I've heard so many of you say already this morning, is so important. When we follow their interests, they can overcome and they'll be able to persist with so many things. So what kind of roadblocks to learning have you guys encountered personally in the students? I know dyslexia is a common one we see, right? We see attention deficits, we see executive function deficits, right? We'll see motor challenges, right? We'll see sensory challenges. What have you seen personally or in your students that anybody would like to share that you're kind of think is a roadblock that has gotten in the way of learning, or maybe how you've worked to get around that roadblock? So Cindy says language and speech. Mandy says anxiety. Mandy, what have you seen with anxiety? I think that's common for a lot of people.
It's actually been something kind of new this year. We've noticed a lot more anxiety overall in our students. Sure it has something to do with our collective trauma around COVID. But I see it manifesting itself in different ways. So I see students who are anxious about how they're being perceived by other students, or they're anxious about things at home and they communicate with us like, I'm just really worried about, XYZ. And so they can't think about the other things that are happening in the room, or anxious that they won't be able to complete, said work before their time, before the work period is over, or they won't be able to complete it by the due date. And so like this inability to even start a task because of the anxiety related to completion, or I won't do it well. And so I'm anxious about that. The whole gambit, whole range.
So I expect a lot of people are seeing that in their students. Yeah, a lot of people are seeing anxiety. So, and what would the teachings say? What would be the right thing to do to help a child work with that, with the roadblocks? What has been successful? You've got this roadblock, you know how the brain works, right? The brain is pruning, the brain is repeatedly doing things and getting stronger at it. So what might we want to do to help shift this anxiety pattern away? Anybody have ideas on that, this thinking pattern?
I was going to say one thing that we try is to change that internal dialogue that the child has with themselves. So doing more positive. So essentially like focusing away from the negative and focusing on the positive. Like, well, let's just say I'm not getting that yet. Or let's look at like all the work you have accomplished so far. So just trying to steer them back to the positive thing to get them out of that negative headspace. It's one thing we're trying.
That's just what we were talking about, Mandy. That's so cool. People are also saying overstimulation is a challenge in modeling yourself with your self-talk out loud. Teresa, you're saying that. Yeah, for sure, right? And then consistency. Connie, I love that. Consistency in the classroom. That's very helpful. And then addressing a neutral time when they are not experiencing the anxiety. Oh, and that's great, because we don't want to really address things head on and cause a threat response, but come back to it in a neutral time and ask questions, Colleen, to find out where they are. These are fantastic ideas about that. And then Ebony has a roadblock for me was more of realizing the needs of the child was sometimes emotional and not always academic. Yeah. Ebony, do you want to say something else about that? Do you have a specific example, Ebony, that you were thinking of?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So earlier when we had the Breakout Room, and I think it was Melissa, was talking about her her example of her child. Mine was similar like that, but like the opposite, where we have one child, he's still here now, but he came to us when he was a toddler, and now he just turned 5 on Monday. And when he came over, he had a few like medical things that kind of allowed us to be more hands-on with him in a way that we usually stand back with other children. And so he got fixated on me in particular, like for like emotional needs. And so whenever he would get upset about something, or he felt he couldn't do something, he would refuse to do the work. He would just sit, he would unparticipate. And it became to a point where it was almost a hindrance, because he was at an area in his life where he's able to do certain things, but he just wasn't able to do it because he hadn't practiced, because he refused to do it. And so this year, I was more into the mindset of, okay, I'm just going to encourage him to keep doing this, be a little more hands-off, step away from it. And his behavior got worse in the sense that like he would come in and he would follow me around, or he would come and like I'd be working with another child and he would come and sit right in front of me, or if I would move, he would get up, move, and step in front of me so I could see him. And or at nap time, he didn't take a nap, but he would do something just to come lay down and sit by me. So then me and some of the my coworkers were talking about it, and his mom, we found out that his mom was pregnant, and he was always an only child. And so we figured, okay, maybe he just needs that extra attention, not in a way of like coddling him, but just giving him a little more. So I was like, you know what, let's just try it, because I haven't tried it, so we'll just try it. So I would try to, and the other teachers stepped up too, so that we would give him a little bit more of this, or we'd be a little more patient, or we do just a little bit more with like the work than we would with another child who's able to be more on their own. And within, because this was in late August, by October, this last month, it's been such a remarkable turnaround. Like his parents have mentioned it. Like we were just talking about it last week. Like he's able to go do his own work. He's getting his workout, being more independent. And I thought to myself, okay, so I always assumed that I had to be hands off, that I couldn't, but maybe it wasn't that it was an academic thing. He just felt he needed that need that wasn't being met. And so we tried that, and it was a world of difference. And that was a roadblock for me to overcome in a way. So.
Yeah. Wow. That's like, there were so many roadblocks and so many solutions. I don't even know where to start. That was like awesome, because you were the roadblock and you were the solution, and he was the roadblock and he was the solution. It's like all happening in the same place. But I think you're really hitting this key point, Ebony, that we have to give them what they need, right? We have to start with what they need. You can't just.
And I was worried. Ahead. I was like, what? If I'm making him more dependent, like, isn't that hindering the child? But then I thought, okay, it got to the point where it was such a difficulty in the class that we were like, maybe we should just try this different technique just to see if anything will have a different outcome. And so we tried it, and I got a little more hands-on. And there was a couple times where, we even talked with other teachers, because he always, he just needed that extra, that I would actually, I babysat him a couple times at home, like when his mom was there and I babysat him. And I mean, it is literally a complete turnaround. So. And
was the baby born yet?
Yes, the baby was born early. And so we thought that was probably a little bit to do with it too, because he was no longer an only child. And so he felt like he wasn't getting enough attention, but it worked out for the best. So that was a learning movement for me. And
Yeah, well, this is awesome because this is actually leading right to what we're going to get into next, Ebony. And so when we look at these roadblocks to learning, when we encounter them, we want to see what is really going on. Is it a physiological need? Is it a psychological need? Or is it a cognitive need? Right? Where are we starting? And we kind of want to approach it in that order. You know, like physiologic, maybe they're just exhausted. Right. And we see that sometimes they come in and you see these dark circles under their eyes and you're like, okay, I'm not going to give you the racks and tubes division lesson today. You know what I mean? You might not be ready for it unless they're, ready to jump in. You're going to ease it up a little bit. Right. Is it psychological? Like Ebony was describing, where they just don't have that security in relationships and they need that. And that's what you need to address. Or is it cognitive? I think it's easy for us to jump to cognitive. We kind of skip 1 and 2 and jump to 3 and we're like, get the interventionist. We don't know what to do. Maybe it's more in public school. But I think this is actually based on Tracy Takahama Espinosa, who teaches the Harvard course with me, and her colleague, Sheila Dean, who developed this system of how to intervene and what the order is. And so this intervention scaling system has you starting with the physiological needs. Look at their biology, right? Start with biology. And then look at psychology, and then look at cognitive, right? And kind of go down in that order as a way to approach it. So attention, we're going to stick with attention for a little bit longer. Attention's really intertwined with cognition and executive function. So executive functions, right? We've already talked about it 6 times without hitting it directly. It has this trajectory of development, which many of you may be familiar with, where you've got this proficiency going up here on the left. You've got age going here on the right, or on the bottom, I'm sorry. And then you see this huge bump in executive function proficiency between the ages of 3 and 6, right? Then you see another bump in adolescence, okay? And then, that's me. So I'm apparently lower than my 16-year-old son, right? That's so just humble, okay. So this trajectory, what are we talking about with executive functions? The foundations of executive functions are things that we're probably familiar with. We've already talked about inhibitory control. This morning, that was coming up when we were talking about they can't stop themselves from doing something. Inhibitory control means stopping yourself from doing an unskillful thing, right? Working memory is keeping track of something, like all the steps in your procedure or your, 2-step verification code, right? Or your shopping list without writing it down. That's your working memory. Cognitive flexibility is the ability to see something from somebody else's view, to take a different idea than the one that you had to, not being so attached to your own ideas that you can't entertain another idea. That's flexibility. Those are the foundations for higher level executive functions, okay? Which are reasoning, problem solving, and planning, right? So we're starting always with the foundations at any step with that executive functions. So how do we help develop these in children? Right? What is it that we're doing or not doing that helps with executive function development? What do you think? What do we do that helps with their inhibitory control or their working memory? Colleen, I want to hear from you because you've got that beautiful little friend on your lap that's on and off your lap. Is that a puppy or a cat that's with you? I couldn't see.
It's a dog. So sorry.
Oh, no, why sorry? That's great.
Seeking attention.
There you go. She wants your attention, right? Okay. No inhibitory control in that dog, right? She can't stop herself. Okay. So what do you think? How do we help children develop these foundations for executive function? Who has an idea? The silence game, Laura, oh, tell us what you mean by that. Do you play the silence game often, Laura?
We like to play the silence game actually the kids request it during circle time. Basically, we just we practice silence and together as a community, and we see how long we can make it before someone starts to talk, or maybe there are some children that really struggle with the concept of silence. So when I was studying executive functioning and all the different things we do in Montessori, and that was the first one that really stood out in my mind.
Yeah, because you have to inhibit. That's all inhibitory control, right? That's just
right.
Like, okay, notice what's happening without doing anything about it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's an awesome example. Who has an example of working memory? I think I see Teresa has retrieving games. And they're, oh yeah, right. Do you use Bring Me games a lot in your classroom, Teresa? McPherson. I think there's more than one Teresa. Oh, is she frozen
Sorry,
again?
I was struggling to find it.
Yeah.
Yes. This is my first year as a lead teacher. I've been in this room for 3 years, and yes, I have started to use them a lot. I'm in my training right now, so I'm still learning a lot of things. But
yeah,
I find
love the
working
Bring Me-
memory is something that I think I need to dig deeper in and find more ways to do that. I personally have a almost 15-year-old that has autism and ADHD and anxiety, and I know her working memory is still struggles. So I'm always thinking about these things that are on the screen of what we can do in the 3 to 6-year-olds that I'm working with to help give them that foundation.
Yeah, well, I think the Bring Me games are really a key part of it. And they're helpful for us because when we're stuck for a moment, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with this child? They need a lesson. I can't remember, blah, blah, blah. You're just like, could you bring me a golden bead? Just, boom, get them doing something and it buys you time, right? So it's good for their working memory and it's your processing time.
Well, and then there's some that need to move. So, if you can take a work and find a way to incorporate some movement in it, that helps too.
That's right. Doing matching at a distance, having one set of matching cards on one side of the room, right? Your geometric cabinet and geometric cards, separate sides of the room, right? So they're walking and keeping track of it. Great examples. And cognitive flexibility, Dylan, encouraging them to play with other kids. Because I wanted to ask about cognitive flexibility. One thing I know where we have a lot of trouble is with transitions. And that is an example of immature cognitive flexibility because they're like, I'm not ready to switch, right? That's cognitive flexibility. I can't just drop it and switch. I'm still working on it, right? So Dylan says encouraging them to play with other kids helps them with cognitive flexibility. What about other routines? Are there routines that we do that help them notice shift? Does anybody put on some music, 10 minutes before it's time to end the morning work cycle or, lower the lights or things like that? That can help ease people in to cognitive flexibility, I think. All right. So I think there's a music box, Teresa, love it. So I think there's a bazillion examples of it. And I want to ask you if just this generally freedom with limits is executive function training. Because I'm thinking it is just allowing them to choose their own activity, right? They've got to make a decision right there. They work at their own pace so that they can develop their concentration, repeat as much as they need, repetition, making strong neural pathways, but not being free to do anything dangerous, destructive, or demeaning, the 3 Ds. And that's where we have to intervene. Or like with Teresa, you have to decide, well, is that really destructive? Because, you've got to stay with your lesson, and can't always jump right in, but not interrupting them all the time, right? That's a really great thing. Okay, so I just want to say one more thing about executive functions is that kids who are more active have more brain power, literally, and better executive functions. It increases the size of certain areas in the brain. So we really want to encourage activity in the kids. I know that's been tricky with COVID and people working at home and they're just like, be busy so I can work, but finding ways to really encourage activity at home and at school is just so important for health. And memory, I'm just going to jump over to memory real quick. Memorizing and recalling is a process. Memory is not a video recorder. Memories are taken apart and put back together all the time. But it's through this process of memory consolidation that we help get more reliable memories. And I'll tell you a little story about memory consolidation. I love this story. So the neuroscientists, right? They have this little mouse and they have a little EEG cap on him, right? And it's in a maze. And they watch his brain activity, right? As he's walking around. And they see him, okay, he gets to point 1 and, activity in point 1. Gets to point 2, activity in point 2. Point 3, activity in point 3. Point 4, the mouse pauses, stops, sniffs and scratches. And when he does that, points 4, 3, 2, and 1 get active. It's in the pause that the memories are actually consolidated, in that pause. So many times I see in classrooms, nobody's allowing for the pause, right? It's like, we're just like, okay, next. And we, of course, have much faster processing time, and we've already memorized the thing that they're trying to consolidate and memorize. So it's not obvious to us. But this processing time is essential. You know, taking a pause. Sometimes we see them staring out the window in more traditional schools in Montessori school, and they'll be staring out the window and you'll be like, hey, get on task, right? But they're not actually off task, right? They're consolidating and processing the information that they just got. And then, oh, Colleen, you're funny. We avoid the pause. Yeah, no, we like the pause. Pause is good. You're funny. So also with sleep, sleep is required to consolidate memory. Sleep is required both before and after learning for optimal recall. Sleep. Okay, so here's another exercise portion of the class. I want you to stand up if you got enough sleep last night. Okay, everybody stand up if you got enough sleep last night. And this will change life from day to day. Yeah, we got a bunch of no's. Okay, sit back down. Stand up if you get enough sleep in general. In general. We've got a couple people standing, right? Maybe. Okay, Colleen's up and down. Her poor dog had to be displaced for the stand up. Okay, are you ready? Stand up if you know what enough sleep is. Do you know what it is? Does anybody even know? All right, I'll tell you the big clue. The big clue to what enough sleep is if you wake up without your alarm and you're refreshed. You wake up without your alarm, refreshed, you've had enough sleep. Okay, and now stand up if you'll just sleep when you're dead. You're just gonna wait. There you go, Melissa, jump me up. That's right, you can't do it yet, you'll get there. Okay. Sleep, these are some daily sleep recommendations that they have for different ages. And I know in the preschool, 10 to 13 hours a night. Now you tell some parents this and they're like, I can't, there's no way I can get 13 hours a night. And other parents are like, yes, put that child to bed, right? So, but they need a lot. And to share this information with parents is super, super important and helpful. But again, the obvious way, there's such variability in humans and how much we need, and it varies over time. So the simplest way to figure it out is just to see, do they wake up refreshed without an alarm, right? That's when you know you've had enough sleep. Sleep is linked with intelligence and behavior. If you see, again, we're at this physiologic, the top tier for the intervention scaling system. Preschoolers with less sleep have less peer acceptance, less social engagement, less emotional regulation. They have lower vocabulary scores, lower executive function scores. They have more emotional difficulties, greater hyperactivity, more behavior problems, right? Adolescents with sleep deprivation have higher rates of depression, obesity, and drowsy driving accidents, right? Higher rates of it. This is so important. Sleep is so underrated and overlooked. And I love this graph. So this research, they looked at sleep deprivation. So this is your performance on these highly skilled tasks, right? Going up there. This is the hours that you've been awake, right? So you can see you're going down, hours of sleep deprivation right there. It's going pretty bad. This is your blood alcohol concentration. As your blood alcohol concentration goes up, your capacity goes right down. So sleep deprivation, you're getting the same result as if you're tipsy, right? As if you're drinking too much. It's the same thing. Okay. Prioritize sleep. That's what I'm saying. Okay. All right. Neuroscience quiz. We consolidate new learning when we A, sleep, B, pause and reflect, C, eat French fries, or D, both A and B. D, we got a lot of D's, a lot of votes for D with a smiley face. Thank you for the smiley face, Teresa. I made her laugh. We only have one band, D. Okay, excellent, Cindy. Okay, that's right. We need both A and B. We need downtime and adequate sleep for optimal learning. Okay, this goes for you and for your students. Let's talk about stress. Stress actually alters memory formation and retrieval. When we are under stress, we produce these stress hormones that enhance memory consolidation, right? Because if you're under stress at that moment, it might be super important. You might be threatened. So you consolidate better, but your retrieval is impaired. So you can't retrieve that information as well when it's learned under stress. Because it uses an amygdala striatal system. So amygdala, right? People have heard of that. It's like the fear response part. It's in the limbic system. And it uses that system for memory formation instead of the hippocampal system. The hippocampus is the typical way for short and long-term memory consolidation. Use a whole different system when you're under stress. right? Now, some stress is good. The stress of like weightlifting, right? And building up your muscle, that stresses your muscles, but in a skillful way, right? It's good. And it can be persisting through a challenge, right? Intellectual or physical. So some stress is good. I'm not saying that all stress is not good, but a little stress is good. But some stress, too much stress, toxic stress, or chronic stress can compromise your executive functions. All right, so here's how this works. I don't know if you've heard this before, but I love this research by Arnsten. And she's done several papers on this. So normally you've got this kind of top-down, we spoke about it earlier, this top-down regulation of your activity in your brain. Like you can decide where you're putting attention or what you're working on, right? Top-down regulation. That's prefrontal activity and it's in charge, and that's an alert, calm state. When we get acute stress, that changes. And you lose that prefrontal control and your activity moves down into the limbic system. So think of it this way. You're doing whatever you're doing, and then all of a sudden somebody like yells at you, ah, and you're like, what happened? And you feel like this, like, oh no, I'm in trouble, right? And it's, I swear that's the feeling of the activity leaving the front of your brain and like going down into your limbic system, right? It's like, oh, I can't think anymore. And then they ask you like, what are you going to do about it? And you're like, something comes out. You don't know what you're saying, right? You made some kind of mistake, whatever. And so blah, 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 because you can't think that straight in that moment. Okay. You don't have access to all of your resources. So this has huge implications for, especially for teaching. And Dr. Montessori was like, don't correct, redirect, because that correction, right, that can trigger a stress response. And we've all done it. We've all, like, there's nobody who's never accidentally corrected a child or another person, you know, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I just blew the whole ball game, right? Because they can't, it's gone, their concentration's gone, it's not happening anymore. And because we interrupted, and it could be the interruption or it could be the stress response that's happening, because everybody has a different trigger for their stress response. Like Ashley, you may be like the calmest, zenest person ever, right? And then like, I'm like, oh no, right? And like, so something happens and Ashley's like, no worries, right? And something happens and I'm like, right? It's different for every person. We can't say that we always know what it's going to be, right? Okay, so I know this is a huge topic for people, and I want us to have a minute to really digest that information, because this influences us in our everyday life and it influences us in our work with the children. So I want you to have a chance to talk about this we'll do a breakout group. And I want you to think of a time when you witnessed acute stress in a student or a friend or yourself. And I want you to think about what happened right before the acute stress response. What happened right after? And was there anything that might have been done differently? Okay, so we're going to do, Erin, if you can give us 5 minutes in the breakout rooms. And if you're in a breakout room with somebody who's like, you know, not really there, you can just come back to this main room and be with us. Okay, so let's go ahead, Erin, and send us off. 5 minutes. Yeah. So what about you with stress? Are there anything you want to share?
I remember during, you know, lockdown or whatever, being out in my garage and just the constant media about, you know, oh, do this, do that, do this. And I was like, I'm not an anxious person, but I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, I feel so anxious right now. I'm like, turn off that radio or that device. I'm like, let's listen to our own music without any commercials or anything. And just, you know, as I started getting into pottery and I'm like, I have to do something else with myself, you know, and find some creative way to get out of this crazy, stressful, introverted self, you know, it's like,
yeah, where we were all forced to socially isolate, and then that becomes a pattern, right? Because anything we do repeatedly becomes a pattern. So then when you're first like going out, I remember the first time I went out to a restaurant, you know, it was like over a year, right? And we were all vaccinated finally, and we met friends there, and I was like, can I really come here? Can I really take off my mask? It was already this pattern. I was like, this is wrong. I should have the mask on, you know. It's funny how quickly those things become patterns for us, isn't it?
And you just think if it stresses you as an adult, just think about, you know, the child's brain is on that too. So.
Yeah, I know, right? I know. I love what Teresa did about just like, well, what were you doing? You're just starting with compassion, you know, with that hornet's nest. It's just like, that's it, right? because everybody's so stressed out.
Right.
It's tricky. It's tricky. ZA, I see you shaking your head. What did you guys talk about, ZA, in your group?
Me?
Yeah.
Is that me? Oh, yeah. I shared my personal experience with my teammates about like last year. I have a tons of work before the deadline. That is the next day, and then at that time, my 3-year-old son like tried to play with me, and my husband just like watching his phone, and which makes me like super mad, and I shout to them, and I furious. I really cannot control myself, and then I just go back focusing on my work and try to like calm down and finish them one by one. And then when I really complete all of my work and start to recall that I did really bad for my family, so then I go back to say sorry to them.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's so hard. We've all been there, right? And that actually is working memory. Your working memory was overloaded and stressed in that moment. And that's usually what causes it. So we think, so this is perfect, because it's like multitasking, right? Who's multitasking? Especially when you just described it perfectly. You're trying to work, but you're also a mom, and you're also have this household, you're a parent, you're trying to do everything, right? In the same moment. And then some delivery drivers at your door and they're ringing, right? And you're like, it's like, what you're trying, and you just, your working memory is limited. And that's why we can't actually multitask. That's a myth. Anybody who says they're multitasking, what you're doing is you're actually stressing out your working memory. You're really overloading working memory to try and juggle and keep track of things, because the brain loves to work in order. It works in order, in sequence, right? And so this is a perfect example, Zia. I love it. And so this stress response is real, right? And then it was harder, you said, to get back to your work because you're like, you stressed yourself out because you knew you didn't want to yell at your kids, but it happens, right? And so it's like, oh my gosh, it's like compassion, right? We just need so much compassion. Oh my gosh. Susie, you said in the chat that you had a good breakout group. Do you want to tell us what you guys talked about, Suzanne?
Hi. Yes. We talked about a couple of members and I shared the stress around a child maybe spilling things or breaking things and how we would react to it. And, versus like what we want to do, maybe they're doing it at an inopportune time, something, and we're just about to get our coats on, we're just about to go outside, but something gets spilled and we have to stop that. But the way we react to it helps. I had a kid the other day. I'm a toddler teacher, assistant toddler teacher. And so, I'm at the snack table in the morning and he spilled something, and it showed me that I'm reacting right because I didn't have to say anything. He went and got a cloth by himself. It wasn't where we keep the cleaning cloth, but it was a cloth. And I could have stopped it and said, no, this is where, no, he got it on his own. He cleaned it up and he went back to eating. And I was like, wow, okay. And so a couple of members of the group shared the same. One said her son threw an eraser at a TV and it got a line in it. And she caught herself because it was a big deal, but it wasn't. And the way she handled it was good because then he knew how to handle it. And I was saying it helps us and helps them deal with stress in life because they look at us and how are we going to handle something? And really something like that isn't a big deal. But a lot of times we treat it like one. And the way, so we just talked about another member shared her daughter spilled something and broke a glass or a vase, and she didn't know what to do, and she was yelling at him, and then she came back and she, thought it over, and it's not that big of a deal. She's like, it's okay. We can get more water. We can get another, and it was a really good group. I really liked it.
Wow. Wow, that's really powerful what you're talking about. Uma, you look so intent listening there. Did you have a similar conversation in your breakout room? Were you talking about those kind of examples where you're noticing what things that could stress you out and then you just changed your view so that they weren't so stressful? Uma, do you want to share what you're thinking?
You're talking about me? This is Uma.
Yeah.
No, like, so the one of my that she was talking about that she was working in the previous school and she was working all by herself. And when she was outside, she didn't have any cell phone. And one of her students, she fell down and the chin got cut. So she couldn't reach anyone, and that was so stressful for her. And she has to grab all other children to the other side of the building, you know. So that was the thing she was discussing about.
Yeah. And then it's hard to think straight when you're in that moment because the stress is really.
So she don't know. Yep. She couldn't do what to do. Like she was like so nervous and she couldn't think at that by that moment what to do. Then she has to grab everyone. You know, she couldn't leave anyone because she was the only one working there. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's a great example, Uma. Thank you for sharing that. Did anybody else have something they wanted to bring forward? Because that stress is such a big discussion. We've seen ourselves accidentally cause stress responses in others. We've seen ourselves experience stress responses in response to others. Lisa, your hand is raised. What did you want to say?
I wanted to get your comments on something that happened after we came back from the shutdown in my early childhood class. We had pods of 10. We came back in September with lots of very strict protocols. We all know what it is. And what we noticed in the 10 students in our pod were that they could not stop working. And so after several weeks, we started reaching out to the parents to ask to see what they were experiencing at home. And they were experiencing that their children would go from a full day of school where they would not even stop to have a snack. They just were almost driven. It did not look or feel like it was a healthy drive. And the parents were experiencing that when they got home, the children were insisting that they continue to work. And of course, they had all these concrete pandemic materials that we had sent home. And so it was causing conflict in the family. So parents were coming back to us and asking for us as teachers advice. We responded by building in specific times where we cued, shutdown of work and specific snack and whatever. And the kids were all behind barriers. I mean, there were so many abnormal things going on there, but I never really figured out what was happening there. And I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, the children, we were talking about this in our own breakout room about how our patterns change so rapidly and how quickly those patterns, Lisa, become our new norm, And so this not eating with other people, for snack, it's like all of a sudden we're like, we don't eat with other people, and in my office, we're like, okay, who's going to lunch? And we all take turns, and we never eat together anymore, which is like the least human thing in the world, right? We're humans, we eat, we talk, right? That's what we do. Not anymore. Right. So I think these patterns change very quickly is what happens. And then there's this whole new medium of the screen, and adults, we're on screens all the time. And then now with the pandemic, we're on screens even more. Right. And sometimes it's work, work, work. And then it's escape, escape, escape. Right. But it's always screen, screen, screen. Right. And so that's what we're modeling for the children. And so the children are just adapting. Right. They're doing what they should do. They're adapting. And they're creating those patterns. So we just have to readapt them, to more skillful patterns. And it happens to all of us, and we can do it. You're probably already doing it. Adia, do you agree? You're shaking your head. Oh, and you have a little dog on your lap too. Oh, I love it.
I
with the dog.
do. I
That's the
do.
nice thing about Zoom.
He requires a lot of attention
He does.
because he's a puppy as well.
Ah.
I was curious as to like how people are. Last year, I used this term a lot, like COVID grace. So when I would get frustrated or when people would react in a certain way, and I'd be like, "Wow, that response is like over what I feel like it should normally be," and that was like COVID grace. Give people COVID grace. But how are people handling it now that we're like, 20 months into all of this? I mean, I used to have a pretty big filter. Now it's like I have this much room and that cup spills over so quickly. And even just trying to reset, like I just am not, I do practice meditation daily. I practice mindfulness techniques, to help as well. But I feel almost like my tank is so low that even though I'm doing those things, I mean, it's probably helped me from totally losing it. But it's hard to totally be there for the children and for my staff because, I'm just feeling really tapped. I'm just curious, like how other people are continuing to find the COVID grace and finding ways to reset, with just the massive amount of stress that's just at more of a global level.
That's a great question, Adia. And I know, Colleen, your hand is raised. Do you want to respond to Adia?
I think that I had a similar question. I was wondering if there is data. I mean, what Adia is referring to is how we are responding to the prolonged stress as a result of COVID and all of the different experiences that everyone is having. And I know those will all be individualistic, but also they'll be related to the age range. And for those children entering, I think they've already collected some data. So those children entering school for the first time and where they are as they return back from back into normal education versus those who never had anything else. So I just wondered what is happening to the brain. I think I'm trying to ask so many questions, but if we can focus it back down to what is happening to the brain with prolonged stress at different age levels. If we look at Montessori, 3 to 6, 6 to 9, 9 to 12, 12 to 15. My biggest concern is the adolescent, but I understand academically they're getting back faster than the youngers, but still that's my question.
So this is a great question. And the research is just coming in. We know a lot of things historically about toxic stress and about chronic stress. And the brain, doesn't do so good on it. The thing is, we're all experiencing that. We have this collective experience of stress, right? And so I think what Adia is pointing out, I love the term COVID grace. I'm just like, whoa, I love it. And that is really what we can do is just try to fall back on that and help. Specifically, we know that it takes with chronic stress and with toxic stress, it is damaging for the brain, but we also know that the brain can heal and the brain can heal itself. Norman Doidge, if anybody's read Norman Doidge, he's a neuroscientist. He's written some great books. And one is called, I'll write his name in the chat, Norman Doidge. And I think it's his latest book is The Brain's Way of Healing. And it's this phenomenal book, which gives example after example after example of completely different ways that people from various situations where their brain is really challenged are able to recover and come back. But it takes time. The most important thing for us to remember, I remember when I had my daughter, I was pregnant 9 months. And then, my body was like, what is this body you have? After you pray, if anybody's brain, you're like, oh my gosh, right? And she's like, listen, it took me 9 months to get that way. It's going to take me 9 months to get back, right? It's taken us 1.5 years to get where we are with COVID. Let's not think we're going to be all better in a week, okay? It's going to take us some time. We just have to be consistent. I think that's probably the best advice I can offer. Sue, you have your hand raised. Maybe you have something else to say.
Well, just to add to this very interesting discussion, one thing I've observed in my classroom 3 to 6, and I think the other teachers would agree, is the amazing resiliency of the children that age. And I spent a lot of time, comforting in a way, or informing parents. In a lot of ways, it's not as bad as you think for the kids. For instance, just the simple idea of wearing masks. And if a child was going to be masked, and I lost sleep, after the shutdown and before we started back up with masks, and it was actually no problem for the kids to wear masks. It's just like you put on a shirt, you put on socks, and you put on your mask. Of course, the teachers, we're ready to rip our masks off at lunchtime or as soon as we can. But the children are, because of the plasticity of their brain and everything that you've been talking about, it seems like they're incredibly suitable and adaptable to this. And what Montessori is all about is teaching children how to live in the world which they inhabit, and they're open to that. And I wish that parents could feel less stress about some of this stuff on the children. In many ways, it's harder for adults, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. Wow, that's so insightful, Sue. Gia, your hand is raised, and there's your daughter. Hello, daughter. And your dog. We have both.
She's taking her everywhere. She's their best friend. So I wanted to elaborate on what you just said, and also my group mate, Suzanne, said in our group that we can actually, based on how we react to our kids, we can actually teach them how to deal and how to react to their stress. And I personally feel like our kids, from our reaction, they learn how to acknowledge their stress level, and then they learn our reaction to, they copy or the reaction that we do to them to deal with their stress. So like Suzanne said, like if this kid just poured water everywhere, or just had like a glass shattering moment, like how do you deal with that? Like we would say, hey, it's okay. It happens. And next time we will try to do this and that to prevent it. And then they know, okay, I understand, like she acknowledges that I'm in a stress level and this is okay. And next time I will do the same to prevent this. I will do I would not panic, and I would just tell myself it's okay. And I would just solve this problem by doing this and that. And then I see it in my own life, because, a lot of times, like in marriage, at the first time you deal with your partner and you have differences, and then at that moment you get really stressed out and you just yell at each other, and they turn out to be like really horrible afterwards. And then later on you learn like how to communicate and how to be like, oh, this is okay, we'll just get a new thing, we'll just do this, and then they move on. And then you realize, okay, obviously you at those moments you can take another route. And I see it in my daughter too, like a lot of times when she's in stress and I help her out, and then actually afterwards when I'm in stress and then when I do something wrong and she sees me in this panic mode, and she'll come to say, it's okay, Mom, like it's okay to do this. So I feel like our kids can learn like how to redirect their stress into like how to solve this problem, and they can acknowledge, okay, my stress level is low and I can handle it, or my stress level is really high, I need adults to come and help me. Because right now she's in elementary, obviously she's handling more stress because we were all in COVID and we were at home. And now she goes to school and she's in a new environment because we were all online doing online learning. And then now she's in the real school and she's handling a lot of relationship with kids and a lot of stress. So we're now, actually yesterday, we were still talking about like, how do you handle stress around the kids? And if somebody mistreating you, how are you going to, express yourself, knowing that you're in stress and knowing like coming home to talk to us, communicate, and all that things they're learning, they will direct to everybody around them, like even to adults. And I feel like I get a lot of comfort from her too. So every time like we are acting the way that we are in the situation of our kids being stressed, they are also learning from us, how do they do it, like how do they handle this situation. So I think
this is so perfect. what you're bringing up, this is just what I'm going to share my screen again, because this is actually, I think it's the next thing that we're going to. I'm going to skip that. And we already, well, I was going to skip ahead, but I did want to talk about this idea of our modeling and adaptation in the mirror neuron system. And so do you want to do, we don't have as much time to do everything, but I think we should probably do mindfulness first. Do you guys mind if we do a quick mindfulness thing? We'll do it quick. Okay, Dylan's shaking your head. Thank you, Dylan. Okay, I just want to tell you how mindfulness works and why it's beneficial for ameliorating stress, and why it's beneficial for improving our attentional capacities, and overall strengthening our system. So how it works, many of you, raise your hand if you have a mindfulness practice or have meditated in the past. Probably many people. Keep your hand up so I can scroll. Okay, right about half. Okay, good. So here, this is how it works. When you have a mindfulness practice, one of the meditation teachings, the standard teaching, a basic teaching is that you sit and you focus on something. Usually it's the breath, and you put all of your attention on the breath, right? And then when thoughts come into your mind, you just label it thinking, watch it pass like a cloud in the sky, right? Sure, easy, right? I said it in 10 seconds. Okay, yeah, try it. It's not so easy. Okay, what happens really is you sit down and you say, okay, I'm going to put all my attention on the breath. You notice your breath, and then your mind wanders like right away, right? Like you don't even get, you don't get to the third breath, and your mind is like planning, you're, reflecting, you're thinking, you're something, your attention is gone. So that's how it happens. We start with, we focus on the breath, okay? And that's our executive network saying, put your attention here on the breath. And then our mind wanders, and that's our default mode network, okay? And that's our default activity, what we just go to when we're not intentionally doing anything, default mode network. And at some point we notice that our mind has wandered, right? We become aware, oh wait, that's thinking, right? That's our saliency network that notices that our mind has wandered. And then we say, okay, I'm going to put my attention back on the focus of the practice, which maybe it's the breath in this case. That's our executive network coming back in, okay? So we've got this total repeat, executive default mode, saliency, executive default mode, saliency. It's like push-ups for the brain, right? You're learning how to toggle between these different network activities and move from them at your choice, instead of the brain just being like zinging you, wherever it wants to go, you having a voice in it. So that's how you're strengthening these networks in mindfulness, okay? And there's a little practice that we could do, and this is particularly relevant, I think, I know Teresa's has an adolescent daughter with autism, and this practice has been used to work with adolescents with autism who are violent. And what you do is you just sit or stand in a comfortable position, okay? And we can all do this. So everybody upright, not slouchy, no slouching, upright, okay? I see some shifting, very good, shifting. And you wanna just notice, if you're sitting comfortable, you want the soles of your feet flat on the floor. You're gonna breathe naturally and do nothing. You would do that for several minutes. And then cast your mind back to an incident that made you very angry, and stay with the anger. You are feeling angry. Angry thoughts are flowing through your mind. Let them flow naturally without restriction. Stay with the anger. Your body may show signs of anger, like breathing rapidly. Now shift all of your attention to the soles of your feet. Slowly move your toes. Feel your shoes covering your feet. The texture of your socks. The curve of your arch. The heels of your feet against the back of your shoes. If you do not have shoes on, feel the floor or carpet with the soles of your feet. Keep breathing naturally. Focus on the soles of your feet until you feel calm. Practice this mindfulness exercise until you can use it whenever and wherever an incident occurs that may otherwise lead you to be verbally or physically aggressive. Remember that once you are calm, you can walk away from the incident or situation with a smile on your face because you controlled your anger. Or if you need to respond, you can respond with a calm and clear mind without verbal threats or aggression. So that's the practice. Obviously, it would take much longer. And you would do it incrementally. With the adolescents with autism, you do just a tiny bit to start. It takes weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks before you can get through the whole practice. And the practice itself would take some time. But you can see that just this process, I think people felt a shift in their own attention as they switched where their attention was. Jan's shaking her head. And Cindy wrote, wow, yeah, you feel that shift. So what you did is you just exercised all of those networks, and it brings a calming sensation to people. So these mindfulness practices can be very helpful in any degree, even if you can only do it for a short time. They actually change very quickly. Even 11 hours of mindfulness practice can improve the white matter performance and integrity in your brain, just 11 hours. The more you practice, the more significant, obviously, the changes would be. But even a little bit helps. So this is not another thing to add stress to your life. There's so many self-care things I'm not doing. No, just, take a minute, like when you wash your hands, you're washing your hands anyway. Put all your attention on washing your hands, right? You're walking upstairs, put all of the attention on walking, on your feeling of your legs moving. Okay, so there are tiny ways you can implement this. The brain loves this, loves it, loves it. It's very good to help with stress. Another really great thing for stress is relationships. Our relationships really buffer stress. And the oversimplified explanation has to do with oxytocin, okay? Social supports promote oxytocin release, and that's a buffer for stress. I have a video that I'm not going to watch with us because we don't have time. But if you are interested in this concept of toxic stress, I know Lisa was asking about it. Go to the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard. I think the URL is right there, developingchild.harvard.edu. There are so many fantastic resources there and little videos you can watch that are quite helpful for this, okay? But the basic idea is serve and return. We're giving and we're taking. The child is giving and we're returning. So it's like you're playing tennis. They serve you the ball and you serve it back, right? So this is like when, the child, when there's a baby, and they're looking and they go, ba, 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 like that. And then the adult goes, ba, 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 right? That's our return. They serve and we return on their level what they gave us, We don't go and stick our own agenda in there. We just follow with them and interact with them. That's called serve and return. And it's super important for supportive and helpful relationships. And that has to do with this concept of adaptation, right? And how we're changing. Our brain is physically changing. And there's a whole field, if you're interested in this, of cultural neuroscience. And you can Google that. There's really interesting stuff about how our brains develop differently based on where we grow up. Not based on our genetics so much as our culture, and our culture is varied. You can be, doesn't matter where you are. It's the culture that really makes that change. And you can see, I love this picture because you can see these farmers, you see this relaxed stance in their kids, they're just relaxed, just like their parents. That's their culture, is to hold their body that way. And then look at Michelle Obama. She's right there. And her daughters, they're like clones, right? They have just adapted to her behavior and her expectations, both, but behavior, I think, more, right? Okay. So, and then there's this is partly related to this concept of mirror neurons, which is what I really wanted to talk to you about, which is where our brain experiences things that other people, if we perceive that someone else is experiencing something, our brain experiences it as if it were happening to us, but to a lesser degree. Okay. Now here's how this happened. The researcher was trying to get their monkey to do something and the monkey wasn't doing anything. They were getting no data. And so the researchers eating peanuts, and the monkey wants the peanut, right? So the monkey's like, give me the peanut, give me the peanut. And the researcher's like, big, strong, smart researcher, just because no, sticks out his tongue at the monkey. Okay, that's what the researcher does. Well, the monkey sticks his tongue back out at the researcher, like, right at you. Okay, the monkey's wired up when this happens. And they see that when the monkey sees the researcher stick out his tongue, and when the monkey sticks out his own tongue, the same parts of the brain are active. Same parts of the brain. When you perceive someone else is experiencing something or you experiencing it yourself, your brain gets active in the same areas. So this is why, like now it's getting close to lunch. You might, maybe someone in the other room like opens a bag of potato chips, right? And you're like, oh, you hear that, right? And you're like, you're all of a sudden, they're like, oh, they're eating, and you're like salty. And it's like you're eating the chips, right? You're not even in the same room as the chips. And that's your mirror neurons, right? Because you're perceiving this experience. Okay. And so that's how it works. So this is why role modeling is so essential for us, right? Especially with parents. It's easy for us to get concerned, like, oh, the parents, oh, the home, it's so stressed, or, it's bad, and they're doing this wrong, they're doing this wrong. We are a mirror neuron for the parent, right? So we can help so much if we can just breathe into our feet, right? And give that calmness to the parents and focus on the positive with the parents. Every parent is doing something right. Every child adores their parent, okay? So we need to focus on that and go forward from there. That helps a lot with the stress that's going on right now. And that brings up a lot of emotion for us, just dealing with these parents. Emotions are an important part of learning. I know there's a much strong, especially since COVID, one blessing of COVID is that a greater attention is coming in traditional education on social emotional learning and the importance of social emotional acknowledgement in the classroom. So emotion is not just like, oh, we want to be kumbaya, touchy-feely. Yeah, everybody feels this, everybody feels that. No, it's actually essential for cognition. It's essential. So you've got here, and this is research by my friend, I love Mary Helen Imordino Yang. If you're interested in affective neuroscience means the science of emotion and social relationships. And she's a researcher in this field. And this is one of her papers with Antonio Damaso, another great researcher in the field. Emotion is like this much of your bodily processes. Cognition is like this much, but then they overlap is this much. It's so connected. The parts we're using for emotional thinking and for higher thinking, they're so connected. And in fact, when we're little, younger children are actually using those emotional processing movement areas and affective, which means emotional processing areas, to do memory tasks, to do working memory tasks. They're not even using their executive areas. They're using emotional processing areas and movement areas, right? And adolescents are using more prefrontal areas, and the anxiety actually really decreases our working memory capacity. So you can see this interplay between emotion and cognitive capacity. They're really, really connected. We can't kind of pretend it. Now, I wanted to do this group activity, but we're down to 9 minutes, so I think I'm going to pass. But I know you guys are already making friends, right? So I think we're gonna all exchange contact information. You can private chat people if you want to stay in touch, because a great thing to do is just think about an example from your life where emotions played a role in learning. Was it positive? Was it negative? Was it neutral? And think about why. And I'm sorry we don't have time to do it right now, but I suggest that you just pause and do that maybe with a group when you can get to it, okay? All right, so here's a quiz. Social interactions and relationships are less important than academics and education. True or false? Wait, Melissa's like, no way. It's like false, false, false. We got a lot of falses. Okay, false. Human relationships dramatically influence the developing brain's physical structure. That's right. Okay, motion should be kept out of learning. True or false? Jung is laughing, saying, I heard Candy said false. I saw your mouth move. Social contagion. Right. The cognitive areas for processing emotions and executive functions overlap during development. Okay. Feeling and thinking are not separate things. They are unified, just like the brain and the body. You know, Kurt Fisher, my old professor, used to always say, you can't put the brain in a bucket. You cannot think about, the brain is not separate. We're always like, well, what about the brain? You know, and it's so, sexy, right? You want to hear about the brain and neuroscience, right? So interesting. You cannot think about the brain without thinking about the biology of the entire body. They are just like genetics and environment. You can't separate the two. They are together. They're a unified concept. Okay, when my friend opens a bag of chips, I want to eat them because I have no self-control. My body really needs those chips, or my mirror neurons are working. Which one, A, B, or C? Well, for you, who knows? Yeah, it's C. Okay, that was my joke. This is another human part. This is a comic portion. Okay. So our last point is metacognition. And this is thinking about how thinking about how one thinks or learns actually improves learning outcomes. So we've done a lot of that actually today, to think about how is this thinking happening, right? And this is a really great concept to work with children who are elementary and older with. Primary, this is less relevant because primary children, remember, their theory of mind is not developed all the way yet. They can't abstract the way that older children can. They're not in that same phase of development to think about the abstract. But for us adults and for parents, it's very helpful to think about how we think. Now, in older students, we can do things like asking them, when do you learn best? What helps? What gets in the way? And the point is not to get an answer or a plan. Okay, I'm only going to study in a quiet room with, Mozart on, and, it's not to get a plan. The point is just to think about it. Think about the fact that you're thinking and that you have some influence on that. It's not something that is completely separate from your capacity. You have influence on it, right? You can encourage them to come up with learning strategies like studying in the room, silencing the cell phone. But the point is just to think about it. That's the whole point. For younger students, a lot of you have already done and said you're doing this, and this is modeling your own thinking out loud. Like, I wonder if I'll have time to do that later, or I know when they always ask you to come and do something, you're like, oh, I'm just not free right now. I hope I can have time to do it later. Things like that, right? That's modeling. You're thinking, I think the answer is right, but I'm going to go check and make sure, right? And just remember, their thinking process takes longer than ours. So they need a lot of time to get from the start to the finish. So again, we only have 5 minutes, so I'm not going to use it for this, but another great activity for you to do is just to think, how do you do your best learning? Are you active? Are you reflective? Is it quiet? Is it loud? Are you moving? Are you still? Right? What do the outcomes look like? How do you know you really learned? The outcomes are an important consideration. So again, a good thing to do following up on. Remember that learning is dynamic. It's not linear. We all start at different places based on our life experiences, the causes and conditions of our life. And we'll go down different paths, but we can all get to a successful, sustainable finish line, even though our paths are quite different. I can still become a great reader, even though I didn't follow the same reading path that you did, right? It can be different. And that's one of the beautiful things about the Montessori approach, is that we're so diverse in what we do. We're talking about, when we think about optimal development, we're thinking about genes and environment mixed together, interacting. We're thinking about our social emotional learning and our cultural adaptation. We're looking at our interests and our sensitive periods. That's driving our attention, and our opportunities and practice. Okay, all of these things are contributing to our development, to our learning at every age. So we've been talking all morning about mind, brain, and education. Okay, and that's this transdisciplinary approach to learning, where we think about the psychology of the mind, the biology of the body, and the pedagogy of the classroom. And our biggest thing with any field in teaching, and just like with doctors, we want to do no harm. And we inadvertently cause harm all the time because we subscribe to neuromyths. There are a lot of neuromyths out there, and the research is crazy, throwing ideas at us left, right, and central, some of which have really not been vetted. Some things that you might hear, telling girls that they just don't have the right kind of brain to do science. That's a myth. Suggesting that teachers and students' learning styles don't match. It is a myth. There is no such thing as learning styles. Telling a teenager there is a critical period for learning a foreign language and he has passed it. It's a myth. You can learn a foreign language at any age and become fluent in it. So there are a lot of things that we may have adapted to. And I always say question science, because science is fallible. So you may be hearing this report on NPR, or you're reading this report in the Times, and you're like, oh, this is that. Well, for hundreds of years, they said bloodletting is the best treatment for almost every illness, right? That was the best science for hundreds of years. So question what you hear. Don't just swallow it whole, say maybe. And then I just want to say courage to each of you. Courage, my dear, courage. You are a new human that must adapt to this new world. Go on triumphantly. I am here to help you. Okay, so now, I love that quote. That's one of my favorite quotes. Now I want us to take, we only have 2 minutes, but I want us to take this 2 minutes. Don't sign off because I have a surprise after. To write down a reflection. We're going to consolidate your memory, give you an opportunity to pause and reflect. You're going to write down 3 things you did not know before the class began. 2 things you'd like to continue to research as your curiosity has been piqued. And 1 thing you will change in your personal or professional life based on what you just learned. Okay, start writing. Okay, some people are still writing, but we are at noon and I want to respect your time. I'd encourage you to keep reflecting so that you can, after we finish up, the pause. And I'll just say that this is my announcement at the end. If you want to learn more about this, you can come to Harvard with me. Our class starts in the spring. It's Tuesday afternoons from 3 to 5 p.m. We have room for 60 students. So sign up quick if you want to get in. Registration opens, I think, on Monday, November 8th. And you can take it for non-credit, undergrad credit, or for grad credit, whichever you like. And it's great. I'm one of an amazing teaching team that's been working together on this for a while. And Tracy Takahama Espinoza is our leader, our fearless leader, and she's phenomenal. If you enjoyed the workshop that we had this morning, classes like that every week. It's very interactive, and it's fantastic. So if you want to learn more, here's your chance. If you're a geek like me and you want to look at references, I'll just pull them up here so you can have them on the video. If you want to go further, I like to cite all of the research that I use. And so there it is for you. Okay. All right. Now we're officially over. So I don't know if MMS wants to say anything. Does the Montessori Society want to say anything? And then we can hang out a little bit and just chat if people still have questions.
Thank you, Julia. That was wonderful. And I'm sure that we could have just kept going on and on. It's such a wonderful subject. It's great to hear all of these different insights from other people. We really appreciate your energy and your focus and the work that you do and bringing it to us. So thank you so much for being here. And please don't forget that you can also go into the Maitri Learning website, and there's 10% off. I think Erin's going to post a discount code that you can use when you're ordering from her. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you hopefully in the spring, maybe in person. We don't know. We'll see. Thanks, everyone.
Don't forget,
thanks, everybody.
Don't forget to fill out the survey.
Oh, thanks, Karen.
As a member of the board, I'd like to welcome everybody to please continue to communicate with us so we can bring dynamic speakers like Julia on board. Let us know what you want to hear.